Fast jag har slutat. Det är fel signal, men jag har slutat. Okej, vi får ta upp det med... Ja, de har hållit på att bråka med det hela förra veckan. Och kollar det, så då... Ja, de kopplar fel. Ja, de kopplar fel. Ja, välkommen. Jag hämtar kaffe, men stå kvar där.
Klockan är 9 och
It is 9 a.m. and it is time for the party leaders' debate. The following rules apply. The Prime Minister and the leader of the largest of the opposition parties are entitled to a speech of no more than 7 minutes. Other party leaders are entitled to a speech of no more than 5 minutes. In the order of relative size of the parties, there is no right of reply or rejoinder to these first speeches. Then follows a second round, during which no speeches may exceed 2 minutes. Here there is a free right of reply to these speeches, and the rejoinders are taken in the order of relative size of the parties. The time allowed for each rejoinder is limited to 1 minute in accordance with the dueling method. In other words, a total of 4 minutes per duel. The speeches are made from the rostrum on the platform and rejoinders made from the rostrum in front of the platform. And first speaker today, we will hear the first address from Magdalena Andersson, Prime Minister for the Social Democratic Party. You have the floor.
Fru talman, vi står inför ännu en kraftansträngning med anledning av pandemin. Viruset sprids snabbare än någonsin. Antalet patienter på landets sjukhus har ökat med nästan 40% den senaste veckan. Och risken är hög för ett mycket stort antal sjukskrivningar. I måndags presenterade regeringen ytterligare åtgärder för att pressa ner smittspridningen i enlighet med den plan som lades fram i december.
According to the plan that was put forward in September. And we need to limit the number of contacts and also have further restrictions for meetings, etc. Now, the government is not introducing these restrictions easily. But in this particular situation, we really need to get levels of transmission down, and we all need to do our bit. And we know the vaccine is, in fact, our most important tool against serious illness, and most people in intensive care are in fact unvaccinated, which is why I urge those who have not been vaccinated, please go and get yourself a jab. All of those who have taken 2 jabs, take your third when you're able to. Madam Speaker, at the same time as we have also this transmission of virus, we see an increase in tensions in the world around us. The way that Russia and the Russian military have acted gives rise for concern. And this is something that is very difficult for us because this is in our neck of the woods. And several of the challenges put forward by the Russian military, this is really a challenge to the core of our military alliances. And the security order is not negotiable. In Sweden, we decide ourselves with regard to our foreign and security policy. We decide who we choose to work with. That is a right that Sweden has, and all states have that same right. The government is pursuing a close dialogue with our those we collaborate with. And just the other day, I had a chat with the General Secretary of NATO and also the Prime Minister of Finland. And I've also had conversations with the American administration, with the European Union and other partners. And it is so important that we participate in these discussions when it comes to the security order of Europe in the future, because the EU, NATO and G7, they have the same reaction to the Russian actions. It is also important for the government that the parliament is involved and knows about the security position of Sweden. And the meeting this afternoon, we're going to inform the party leaders about the situation at the moment and how the government is acting and reacting. And this chamber must also understand that the government are actively working diplomatically, and we are consistently clear with our message, Sweden's message. And basically it's about the right to defend our sovereignty, our freedom, and the right to live as we wish to live, the right to defend our democracy. Madam Speaker, this autumn it is once again time for this serene moment in in this Parliament. On the 11th of September, people are going to go to the ballot boxes from the north to the south to choose orientation. And democracy, this is a tool, in fact, that has made Sweden this wonderful country that it is. A country with strong norms about fairness and justice, equality, equal opportunities. However, with a redistribution of welfare. A Sweden which I and so many with me are so proud of. But, Madam Speaker, I also see that our country faces serious problems: segregation, the shootings, the violence, climate change, and also forces within our care system which put profits before the interests of our elderly and our children. But problems can be solved. Our country has faced huge, major challenges before. We've done it before. We can and shall do it again, for Sweden can do better. Madam Speaker, it's about the respect that our society has to be based on. It's about respecting each other, respecting future generations. It's about respecting you. You who works and pays tax. For the person who perhaps is retired, or for anyone who's ill and who wants to be cured and then be able to work again. And since I became Prime Minister, all ministers have been given 3 clear priorities. Firstly, we need to do our utmost to break segregation, deal with segregation, which gives rise to the violence in society. Secondly, we need to speed up the green revolution so that future jobs stay here in Sweden. We need to expand electricity production. Prices are far too high. Thirdly, we also need to regain the democratic control over the welfare system, so that people can become old in a secure way. And we've seen in the pandemic that we need to invest in care for the elderly, in the care system. We need to invest in the police, for example, other authorities. We need to give them new, for example, authorities, terrorist legislation there, where we have a special sentencing with regards to honour killings, for example, honour crimes. Madam Speaker, we have only begun. The orientation is very clear, the direction is clear, the goal is clear, and we need a strong society to be there for people in the same way as so many people are prepared to stand up for our country and take their responsibility. It's a matter of respect, again, for everyone who works, people who have worked, people who want to work, and people who are going to work. So the message is clear from the government. It's your turn now.
Tack så mycket, och nästa anförande.
Thank you. Next, Ulf Kristersson from the Moderate Party, please.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, a lot suggests that Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine. Moscow is requiring a security agreement between NATO and Moscow to, as they say, avoid a military conflict situation, but they want to return to the way the Cold War years divided the world and take away the right of independent nations to choose their own way forward. That is entirely out of the question. 2 things need to be done. The West needs to stand up and resist, and Sweden should follow in the wake of what the Finnish leadership has done, speaking very clearly, because what is in the interest of Finland is also in our interest in this case. Madam Speaker, we're reminded that external security needs to be taken very seriously, and it's also high time to become aware of the fact that the most urgent political task right now has to do with Sweden's internal security. Politics cannot do everything it shouldn't, but there are things which can only be resolved by way of using politics, the core tasks of our state, external and domestic security, the single most important responsibility. If you fail here, you have failed across the board. Over the next 2 terms of offices, we need to restore Sweden's security. At the end of the day, it's about security and freedom, gender equality and equality, about morals and decency. Regardless of whether you live in a socially marginalized area or you run a family enterprise or you have children who'd like to be able to walk home from school by themselves, you need to be able to trust that in Sweden the public order can be dealt with properly. Sweden mustn't become a country where you adapt your everyday life to the risk of threats, harassment and violence. But now Sweden is referred to as the most dangerous country in Europe. The promises of more police officers from the Social Democrats led to a situation where we have a lower density than we had in 2014 in terms of the number of police in our country. And the annual recurring promises of getting rid of the gangs led to 1,672 shootings over 5 years only, to 750 now unresolved murder cases, and a horrifying increase in the number of young people who are the victims of brutal robberies. With a growing marginalization in Sweden, the promise of the lowest youth unemployment led to a situation where we have the 4th highest. Every second adult immigrant cannot make a living for themselves. The age-old promise from the Social Democrats has led to a situation of enhanced inequality during the years when Magdalena Andersson was Minister for Finance. Many people never get into the labour market at all. They have received subsidies and welfare only. Now they want to make changes again, not by getting more people out into the labour market, but rather making those who are already out there pay more in taxes. Sweden is now the country of lack of electricity and energy crises. The promise to take the lead in the climate context fell apart when Karlshamn had to fuel so many litres of oil every year. At the same time, the Prime Minister went to Brussels but refused to stand up for Swedish nuclear power. The households are struggling with extremely high electricity prices. It's impossible for families to keep a normal room temperature indoors for fear of high bills. Others are forced to borrow money from the banks to pay their electricity bills. The Moderate Party would like to abolish electricity taxes during the winter. The Prime Minister responded that you could have opted for a fixed term contract for your electricity pricing. That was the only comment we received. This inspires hope, not 4 more years. Sweden is in dire need of change. Madam Speaker, when the Social Democrats put words to the situation in Sweden, it's not the juvenile offenders or the harassment that they're looking to get to. Rather, it's the wage earners, hard-working entrepreneurs, etc. And the weapon is the familiar one of raise the taxes. And savings and capital, such as housing, cheered on by the Green Party and Left Party. That's what they will attack. And they want to regain democratic control over the welfare. Have a taste on that one, all those of you who would like to decide for yourselves which school to send your children to or which elderly care facility to choose for your elderly parents. The Social Democrats would like to take the power over that, not you. When we in the Moderate Party and the Conservative Party say that we would like to bring Sweden to order, we think about those who suffer, who are in danger of suffering, those who suffer from marginalization, or those who live in the areas where the problems are the greatest. They have the right to expect policies that will work. They need to have a well-respected police that are present, a rule of law in this country that will restore the rights of victims and hit hard on perpetrators. They need to know that it will always benefit them more to go to work than to try and pile up various welfare subsidies. Hope not just for the future, but the hope of the present. Swedish companies that give us welfare in tough competition with the global market have the right to simplification in the licensing and permits process and affordable electricity. And those who are children today and their children have the right to inherit a planet where we have taken action so that we can cope with the climate targets, not just talking about how we probably should do it. Now, we've tried this group for 2 terms of office, the Social Democrats and their supporting parties, with and without different agreements in place. It is simply not possible to do this for another 4 years. And this is why Sweden needs a new government, a government which will take the problems in society truly seriously and who's both able and willing to resolve the matters. Thank you.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you. The next address is by Jimmy Åkesson of the Sweden Democrats. You have the floor. Please go ahead.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, the Sweden Democrats today will report the Prime Minister to the Constitutional Committee of the Parliament, and I would like to read parts of what we will submit. The heading is an overview of the government's handling of the Temporary Pandemic Act. Sweden has gone through a very difficult time where our cohesion, our societal functions and our patience have been tried. For some, this effort has been bigger than for others. The pandemic has shown us that things have been neglected within the health care and the care of the elderly, and this should have been remedied a long time ago in a society where we claim to protect the most vulnerable. But many people have been paying a price that simply cannot be measured. To protect life and health with appropriate measures, well, during the pandemic, that has been the highest priority of the Sweden Democrats. And in order to do that, we have to have respect for finding a balance. And we also have to feel humility, considering those who carry the utmost responsibility. But this is also something that tries our democratic functioning and our democratic system. We have to take the right measures, but we also have to refrain from taking measures when so is not necessary. In accordance with the Temporary Pandemic Act, the government has been granted the right to make decisions about limiting the freedoms of the individuals, and this is a step away from our constitution, and it's also prescribed that that has to be done through decisions in the parliament where we have the elected representatives. But this does not mean that the government can do anything. The government cannot use these restrictions for any other purpose than to stop the spread of COVID-19. And that means that restrictions measures have to be necessary. Such a test has to be made, and it has to be made based on the fact that you consider people's life and health. And the government has said that there needs to be a link between restrictions and what you wish to accomplish when it comes to restricting contagion. And it has also been said from the government that these measures cannot apply for longer than absolutely necessary. Decisions about restrictions, well, that can have a severe effect on the individual's life. And here we have a competency that has been granted the government from the parliament, and there have to be limits as to what can be done, we feel. And that is why we require that this is being looked into. Are the restrictions that have been made throughout the winter within that competencies, what can be done within the framework of the Pandemic Act, or is this something that should have been brought to Parliament? On November 23rd, the temporary Löfven government made a decision about requiring a COVID pass for public events. And there was a follow-up from the Magdalena Andersson government, also for cultural activities, for malls, for collective transport. And these were decisions that were made at the same time as we saw an infection spread in society, also amongst those who have had their vaccinations. So there is no evidence that this is something that will limit the spread of the disease. And this now has to be reviewed. This model that the government has decided on with proof of vaccination, is that something that is appropriate for limiting the spread? And is this a decision that a temporary government can make? The 10th of January, there was also a press meeting where we heard about additional restrictions, and also restrictions when it comes to public events, restaurants, opening hours, etc. And the government representatives said during this press meeting that this is being done partly considering the healthcare system, and also because there are other upper respiratory tract infections like the flu that are being spread in society. And this now has to be reviewed. Is this something that truly can be said to be proportional, considering the health of the individual? Thank you. Thank you. And we continue with the next speaker, Annie Lööf from the Centre Party.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, today signals the beginning of the election year 2022, a year where we can debate freely and openly, say what we want and vote for the political alternative we feel is best without being punished for it. It is a serene democratic moment that should never be taken for granted, because around the world billions of people still don't have the right to do this, have the right to say what they think, the right to have a say in free, secret elections, and more than a third of the world's population lives in an authoritarian regime. This is a reminder of the fact that our democracy, our free and open society, must be safeguarded every day of the year, a reminder that we together must take responsibility for defending it from all imaginable threats. Because 2022 is also the third year of the pandemic, the virus is continuing to extinguish lives and is wreaking havoc, tearing apart our everyday lives and undermining our sense of security. The virus is again putting a huge pressure on the care system and all too many companies. We must do what we can to safeguard people's lives and health, and that is decisive. It's decisive both for people's faith in the future developments in Sweden. 2022 is also a year where climate change continues to cause bad harvests and extreme weather, killing our oceans, forcing people to flee. It threatens our green businesses and our freedoms and our very existence. Putting a stop to climate change means we need to act in a smart way, give companies the right tools to succeed, make major investments in our Swedish bioeconomy, make the most of resources in rural areas to travel and build in a greener way, replace fossil materials with sustainable ones. Continue to invest in smart green technology. We need to speed up the application processes. We need to reinforce our electric grid. Ensure that the whole country has good and stable access to green electricity. Invest in everything that can slow down climate change, but that at the same time ensures that our developments in our country and our economy accelerate. But there are also other forces out there than the climate that are a threat to our open society. In the last few months, Russia's actions have seriously increased the tensions in our part of the world, increasing military capabilities at the Ukraine border, using military force to achieve political goals, dictating conditions for the defense and security policies of other countries in a way that would have disastrous consequences for Sweden. This is totally unacceptable. It must be met with a clear answer. The Centre Party wants Sweden and Finland to be clear on our options concerning a military alliance with NATO, for which there is a political majority here in this Riksdag. That would be a strong signal that no other state, other than Sweden, can determine our own defence and security policy. Sweden faces also a number of other major challenges. The political parties now need to show that we are able to tackle the problems that Sweden faces. Prestige needs to be set aside. We need to find a path to quickly find a common agreement to untie the knots and find the solutions. We need to show that we mean what we say regarding building a stronger Sweden, because our country is buzzing with drive and buzzing with opportunities. We see how businesses, both small and major ones, are investing heavily in the environment, in renewables and what is sustainable. We can see it in the north, where our heavy industries are investing billions in a greener future. We see it in the west, where electrification is continuing to be developed, making cars and aircraft greener. We see it in southern Sweden, which has become one of the most innovative regions in the EU, and we see it in the Stockholm region, the capital Stockholm, which has businesses and a startup environment that lies at the forefront globally. We need to cooperate and work together, and we are going to continue to be a green liberal force for this, a force for constructive cooperation in the political centre. That is how we make progress. Not through a struggle between red and blue, or by getting stuck in the old trenches, political trenches of the past, not by giving the extremes influence at the cost of reason, at the cost of decency. No, we need to look ahead. Realise that Sweden needs a new direction. We need a strong, responsible leadership with sustainable and long-term solutions. This is for the climate, for the pandemic, to safeguard and develop our liberal democracy, for the jobs, for job opportunities, for businesses, for equal opportunities, for our rural areas, for reforms and proposals making people's everyday lives both freer and more secure, that take us forward, both as humans and as a country. For politics, empowering every single person. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party, please.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, this year, if you are on sickness or activity benefits, you will have more disposable money starting already this month. In this year's budget, the Left Party secured an increase to 3,000 kronor per month. The rules of the sickness insurance will be fairer, easier to qualify for benefits, and this change is implemented because it is your right to receive payments from the insurance you're actually contributing towards. For over a decade, moderate party members and social democrats have been taking it in turns to make cuts to our sickness insurance. Those who are severely ill have seen their rights expire. Compensation levels have been lagging behind in spite of many promises given before general elections. Now we're finally beginning to clean up after the betrayal by those two parties of those with severe illness in need of their own insurance. And the clear message by the Left Party to the electorate is that we will continue to make improvements to the sickness insurance also after next election, because more remains to be done. We also raise the pensions. Sweden has the largest number of poor old-age pensioners in the Nordic countries, and the secretive pension working group that has been behind and controlling our pension system for almost 30 years has failed in its remit to maintain the levels of pensions. What was promised when the working group was set up was that the government pensions would end up somewhere around 60 and 65% of your previous salary. That is not the situation today. If that had been the case, many would have received considerably larger amounts. For many of us, it's a shock to retire. people who have fought hard throughout an entire working life and then end up with just a few thousand kroner per month in pension. And they're also told by professional opinion makers and right-wing columnists that they didn't work and they didn't do what was required because they only have the guarantee pension. Nothing could be further from the truth. 7 of 10 of the female public service workers who worked so hard during this pension will only receive a guarantee pension. Saying that they didn't put in the effort is being very, very far away from the truth. So it's necessary to take action now to stop our pensions being further eroded. The condition from the Left Party to allow Magdalena Andersson to be elected Prime Minister was that he would contribute to a considerable improvement of pensions. The low level of Swedish basic pension has for a long time kept all the pension levels down, held them back. So it's an important step that the government will present a pension proposal to the Riksdag, the parliament. This is the greatest increase since the current system of guaranteed pension was instigated. However, partly these income improvements are eaten up and lost due to the high electricity prices. The electricity bill for the month of December is likely going to be a shock for many families and companies when they receive them around this time of month. And still, we live in a country which produces a lot and cheap fossil-free energy. It's power production which has been created across generations, and it is the result of sacrifices as well as far-sighted investments made by the Swedish people, with the purpose of ensuring our needs are covered when it comes to affordable electricity. But as in many other areas, our schools, elderly care, healthcare, electricity is also exposed to a privatization and market-based policy without anyone being held accountable. So the cheap electricity this winter has been sold to a price towards our households which exceeds by 20 times the cost of producing it. And not just Sweden has been playing markets with the electricity. The EU is a strong contributing factor, and when the EU and Sweden connect these markets, the Swedish, cheap, affordable markets, with that of many other EU countries where they've mishandled the necessary energy transition and they have a much higher electricity price as a result, the impact is a situation where Swedish prices take a real hike. The Swedish electricity customers are affected, Swedish industry, employment. The power companies are happy, of course, but they're making large and unreasonable profits as electricity can be exported to markets in the rest of the EU. This unwise electricity policy by our government has to stop. We mustn't have any further grids expanded with new cables to the EU, and the exports need to stop. Thank you very much. Ebba Busch of the Christian Democratic Party is our next speaker. You have the floor.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, every New Year's is a promise about to change, a promise about things that things can change, that each and every one of us can contribute for a new future. And that is why I feel hopeful today when it comes to the Swedish future. Not that we're headed in the right direction today, but because things have not been predetermined. We do not have to continue down that road. We can choose another route. And we see that many people want change in our society. And that is why this year will be the year when we have a new government. This will be the year when we have a new start, a new beginning for Sweden. And that is exactly what we need, a new beginning with a new government. Sometimes there is talk about politics and that politics should have bigger dreams. But after 7 years with this government, a big dream would be to believe in another future, a future where we feel safe and secure, where we have green electricity that we can rely on, regardless of what time of the year it is, and where the electricity prices do not cut big holes in wallets for families with children or the elderly, where we do not have to worry about higher rents or higher food prices waiting around the corner. A Sweden that you can trust in, believe in, where we have police, ambulances when we need them, where we know that there is a safe place at the emergency ward where you are to give birth to the next generation, where we do not need to worry about elderly care being non-existent, where everyone, a country where everyone can fulfill their dreams and where we can feel safe and secure in knowing that the government, the state, will take care of things that are the responsibility of the state. If we want such a Sweden where we have freedom and safety, security at the same time, well, then there is only one choice you have this coming fall. Let's look at the two alternatives. We have a government alternative with the Christian Democrats and the Moderate Party being the nucleus, where we can manage a difficult society, where we have a coherent agenda, where we want to accomplish this new beginning for Sweden. And then the other alternative would be a red-green mess, where people cannot explain what parties should collaborate or how they should be able to agree on a budget. So, in practice, we're facing a situation where we basically only have one functional alternative when it comes to a new government, where we can cooperate, where we can get budget bills and other bills passed in Parliament. There is no longer a choice to choose between a right-wing conservative government and a social democratic government that would function. The option is to continue for another 4 years with this red-green chaos, or to vote blue in the next election and do something for Sweden. And what have we been given these 7 years where we have had a red-green government? Well, we have longer waiting times for health care. We have fewer care places in hospitals. The number of shootings have increased, but the number of police have decreased. Shootings have continued. Electricity prices have increased, nuclear power plants have been closed, diesel prices are up, we see less Swedish food being available, and we see that there are more people that are long-term unemployed. And the ranking when it comes to where we rank in the EU unemployment index, well, that has been worse, and we do not need this for another 4 years. So we have the red-green mess, or we have a new beginning for Sweden. That is the choice we have, and together we need to build a Sweden that you can trust in, that you can believe in. Thank you. The next speaker will be Johan Persson from the Liberal Party.
Jag åker upp, fru talman. Ja.
So, Madam Speaker, yes, we need the Liberal Party now more than ever in Swedish policies for a new country, because everyone who wants sustainable policies together with strong protection for our inner and outer security, they know that there are no easy answers to difficult problems. It's about being realistic and consistent, and also bearing in mind the most vulnerable groups in society. We need to enhance security, freedom, and create good life chances. Cold winds are blowing across the world. Champions of democracy in Belarus, Hong Kong, and Somalia. Yes, the list is long, with people who are sacrificing their lives for freedom, so that more people are able to shape their own lives. The fight for liberalism and freedom is more important than ever. The Cold War has taken a step out of the history books and into our everyday lives today. The intensified Russian aggression against the Ukraine must be dealt with and opposed. Russia is preparing to pursue long-term conflict with its democratic neighbours. And the intensified Russian aggression against the Ukraine and, amongst others, Sweden, and their ultimate demands must be strongly opposed. As I said, they are preparing long-term conflict, and Ukraine has already been partly invaded. And for decades now, we have been fighting for stronger defence, and this is always based on others who have the same views as us. It's the EU, the NATO. They are the basis for a reasonable security order. You are not strong on your own. You are just alone, and you lack alliances and friends. These are hardly perfect institutions, but anything else is terrifying. A strong Swedish energy policy means being free from the geopolitical exercising of power of other countries. Sweden and Europe shall not be dependent on dirty Russian totalitarian gas. It is much better to have hydro, nuclear, wind power as our basis. It's good for the climate, for our citizens, for our businesses, and not least for our freedom. Development aid and free trade, these are also part of a dynamic security. We Liberals see how poverty, desperation, environmental collapse lead to human disasters and war. We have starving children in the refugee camps in Yemen. They have hardly chosen their place on earth for their life chances. But there are cold winds blowing in Sweden too. Our inner security is threatened. Threats to our democracy are increasing. And the day before yesterday, we celebrated 100 years of democracy in Sweden. It is our duty to protect the liberal pioneers, what the liberal pioneers created. We therefore wish to see extensive reforms to strengthen the very foundations of democracy, not least the autonomy of our courts, the election process, and also the protection of the Constitution. Our security is also being threatened by serious crime, killing and crushing people and their lives and destroying a belief in the future. It doesn't just attack at random, this violence, but to a larger extent it hits out at those who are already vulnerable. If Swedish law does not apply, other norms do. Violence and oppression are the power base of clans, of gangs, of honor cultures from the Middle Ages. In the Liberal Party of Sweden, there are 10,000 more policemen, sharper tools to fight crime, and relevant punishments for criminals. Re-establishing the rule of law is not enough. We need to make major investments as well in our schools. Order must prevail. Teachers must be able to teach. State responsibility entails fairer resources to pupils across the country. Knowledge goals should not be swept under the carpet by rigging the PISA system. Schools are the foundation. We need to invest heavily, broadly across our marginalised areas. The focus must be on jobs rather than benefits, Swedish language for all, and zero tolerance towards honour culture. Now, the Social Democratic government suddenly wants to do everything it can to improve integration in marginalised areas. Finally, nothing has stopped the Social Democrats the last 30 years, and it's self-evident that everyone who can work shall work. Madam Speaker, we need to decrease tax on work for those who create our welfare. It is what people and businesses create that form the basis of higher pensions, investments in care for the elderly, empowered teachers, providing care workers reasonable working conditions. Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party is for those who believe in Sweden. We regard parliamentary realities in a sober way without giving up our values. We are working for a new, non-socialist government with a warm, liberal heart, for a new country, for our beloved Sweden. Thank you.
Och nästa talare är Per Bodlund, Miljöpartiet. Varsågod.
Next speaker, Per Bolund from the Green Party, please.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In days of pandemic and high energy prices and the Russian escalation in Ukraine, we mustn't lose track of the biggest issue of our times. Only 2 months ago, the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow was concluded. I was the head of the Swedish delegation to that summit. The countries of the world promised each other to do everything in their power to avoid a temperature increase of more than 1.5 degrees. The climate researchers of the world are telling us that this is necessary in order for all of us to have a sustainable future. However, as President Alok Sharma said, the 1.5 degree target is still alive, but it is weak. It has a weak pulse, and Sweden and all the countries of the world need to step up the pace, raise the cost of emissions, stop deforestation, reduce CO2, and speed up the transition to green technology, phasing out the dangerous types of technology. But barely had the ink dried on the agreement before the opposition failed its promise here in Sweden. The Moderate Party, the Christian Democrats and the Sweden Democrats, passively supported by the Centre Party, adopted a budget in the Riksdag, a budget bill which is doing the reverse. It reduces the price of emissions and it increases deforestation. This is a betrayal, and it's time to stop deluding ourselves. This budget, that decision, shows that the environmental debate in Sweden is not about different paths towards a sustainable climate. Rather, one party, the Green Party, consistently would like to do more to support the climate, to push through the measures needed, and other parties, mainly on the right of the spectrum, would like to do less. And it is now when we see the impact of the climate, heat records being set, droughts, forest fires affecting Sweden as well. The floodings in Gävle alone is estimated to have cost 500 million in Swedish krona alone. And modern solutions exist to climate problems. Offshore electricity, batteries, electrical cars and vehicles. There are a number of measures. We can scale up sustainable technologies now, quickly, and phase out the other ones. We mustn't grind to a halt now. Halt the development. The hundreds of millions investment in green technology in Sweden has given thousands and still thousands jobs, reducing emissions globally, enhancing our welfare and a better local economy, thanks to the climate and environmental policies of the Green Party. I'm very proud to announce that clearly. There's a debate over the energy policies today, and if we were to expand nuclear, the electricity prices, the hike we've seen this year are in danger of coming back because no player would like to build nuclear in Sweden. Rather, the bill would be picked up by the Swedish taxpayers. In reality, not even the nuclear favourable parties to the right appear to believe in this. They have no money allocated in their budget bill. So this is nothing other than a radioactive smokescreen built on populism and make-believe. But even more serious is that they counteract what actually does work, wind power, which is the, without comparison, cheapest and best way of expanding cheap electricity. Industry is queuing up to build it. And here, the Sweden Democrats, the Christian Democrats and the Moderate Party have a great task on their shoulders to explain why they do not want to invest in that area. So, Madam Speaker, unfortunately, it's not just the climate in crisis. We have a risk of elimination of many species, sixth global extinction wave. We have made suggestions to improve the situation, but we've also allocated an additional 2 billion to take necessary measures. Unfortunately, the Moderate Party, the Sweden Democrats and the Christian Democrats, with passive support of the Centre Party, took away that possibility. That's yet another betrayal by those parties. And the World Economic Forum yesterday, and that's no coincidence, put their special focus on these issues in their report on global threats. So the choice now is between creating a better environment and creating more jobs or not in Sweden. This is why we need a strong Green Party in Sweden, which will put the climate and the environment at the top of the agenda, both in the Swedish Riksdag and in the government. Thank you very much. Then we will continue with the second round of speakers with 2-minute speeches and the right to rejoinders. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson from the Social Democratic Party has the floor first for her second address. Please go ahead.
Fru talman!
Madam Speaker, segregation is a breeding ground for many of the biggest problems in Sweden. Insecurity, crime, violence. And that is why the government will turn every stone to break segregation and do away with organized crime. To strengthen integration is absolutely decisive in order for us to be successful. People who have come to our country and who are entitled to stay, they should quickly become a part of the community. They should not be outside in parallel shadow societies. And here we have the act on having your own accommodation. That is making up a big problem. Too often, asylum applicants decide to live in areas where we already have large socioeconomic challenges, where there is a lack of housing, where there is an illegal trade with rental contracts, and that contributes to the vulnerability. This gives a breeding ground for criminality. And this is not good enough. And that is why the government wants to phase out that legislation. And we are introducing important new steps. We have a new far-reaching supplementary directive to the investigation that is already ongoing. And we are going to phase out this act on finding your own accommodation. The goal will be that asylum seekers should be staying in reception centers in different municipalities so that we can have a more even distribution. So to phase out this legislation will strengthen the efforts that we're making. Thank you. And rejoinders have been asked for by Ulf Kristersson, Jimmy Åkesson, Anne Lööf, Nooshi Dadgostar, Ebba Busch, Johan Persson and Per Bolund. And we will begin with Ulf Kristersson from the Moderate Party.
Madam Speaker, over the past 5 years, Sweden has had 1,672 shootings. The Prime Minister is now saying after 7 years in government start to leave no stone unturned to get rid of the gangs. And during the very first stone, you find Morgan Johansson. 1672 shootings over the course of the years when Magdalena Andersson was the Minister of Finance, with the collective responsibility for the policies, voting no to a change in the pay for police, no to visitation zones, no to getting rid of a general discount on penalties for young offenders, etc. All the measures that have worked in Denmark. Why didn't the government start dealing with serious crime over the past 7 years? Was everything really just the fault of the Green Party? Thank you. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson for the Social Democrats. Go ahead.
Fru talman!
Madam Speaker, the government has carried out an extensive build-up of the police and the judicial system. We have strengthened punishments for many, many crimes. And in addition to that, we have made criminal many actions that were previously not included in the penal legislation. We have also seen that this has had an impact. Many criminals are now locked up, but what we see today is that a new generation is being recruited into criminality. And then it is obvious that we need to do more. And we're going to strengthen punishments, and we're going to give the police more tools. But we also need to break this system of recruiting into criminality. And here we have to do away with segregation. And this is where we need to turn every stone. Thank you. And then we have a final rejoinder, Ulf Kristersson, Moderate Party.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy that the Prime Minister raises the issue of the police. Magdalena Andersson and Anders Ygeman rolled out the target 5 years ago of 10,000 more employed in the police service by 2024, but 1 in 3 is now actively looking for another job, and hundreds of vacancies are still left in the education programs. And in a public report from the Riksdag, the goal will not be achieved by any date before 2032 due to the low interest. A strong police service is a prerequisite to combat serious crime. Magdalena Andersson is opposed to raising the wage levels, to have paid education for the police, and to raise the penalties for those who attack police on duty. We cannot wait for another 10 years. A new policy is needed after the general election. Thank you.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson. Final rejoinder.
Talman.
Madam Speaker, the government has forcefully increased the number of educational opportunities at police training after the dramatic reductions that were done during the Alliance government and Ulf Kristersson's time in government. We have new police training opportunities, new police academies, and we also have new recruits being included in that training and becoming police officers. And of course, police have to have proper working conditions when it comes to the work environment, when it comes to wages, and also when it comes to the tasks. And that is something that the government is working on. We're continuing this work, and we have already reached more than 50% of the target that we have set up. And I also want to give the police new tools and what they're asking for themselves, which is that we extend the work that is being done in municipalities to stop segregation and recruiting. That ends that set of rejoinders, and then we go on to the next set of rejoinders, where we start with Jimmy Åkesson.
Fru talman, jag tänkte...
Madam Speaker, I'd like to offer a follow-up to my address earlier, where I talked about restrictions. First of all, of course, I and my party and most of the people here in this chamber fully respect the fact that we need to take actions in a serious situation. There's been broad support generally, at least in the latter part of the pandemic, when the government also woke up and to the realization that something needed to be done to reduce community spread and save lives. However, it's been 2 years at this stage. We've learned a lot. And it's becoming ever more important as time goes by that the measures taken are focused, fit for purpose, and proportionate. And so I wonder, Madam Speaker, if the Prime Minister is of the opinion that the newly introduced restrictions live up to those targets, that they're fit for purpose, etc. And if so, what support can Magdalena Andersson give to show that they are fit for purpose, well-focused, and proportionate?
Social
Democratic Party member Magdalena Andersson.
Madam Speaker, I want to stress the fact that the situation right now is very serious. We see record high numbers when it comes to the spread of the disease. It has never been higher since we started testing, which means that the situation is very, very serious. We do see that the vaccine is protecting you against serious illness, but it doesn't seem to be enough with the 2 shots when it comes to spreading the disease. now in the same way with Omicron as what we saw with the Delta, which means that we do need to take action now. We have more and more people in our hospitals, and we also need to have staff who can work in the hospitals, because with this type of a spread, healthcare personnel, police, military, well, we have very many important functions where we risk to see high numbers of sick leave. Jimmy Åkesson.
Om det som statsministern säger här, men det...
Madam Speaker, I more or less agree with what the Prime Minister said, but it didn't answer my question. Are these measures which are fit for purpose, and what support for that view does the Prime Minister have? In intensive care, we have no excess number of patients, and those who are treated for COVID-19 constitutes about a quarter of the corresponding period 12 months ago the other day. And I fail to see, Madam Speaker, how the government, after 2 years in the pandemic, is entirely lacking in margin and preparedness to deal with the current situation, rather resorting to disproportionate and less well-focused restrictions and measures, as I see it, which has a very considerable impact on individuals, and in light of the justification. So I'd like to get back to the Prime Minister on what the justification is. Thank you. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson, final rejoinder.
Talman.
Madam Speaker, you cannot simply just look at the situation today, because we see a rapid increase in contamination, and we're talking about a couple of weeks until we will see an effect in the healthcare system. What we see today is not relevant. What is important is what will happen in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks if we take no action. And the purpose with the restrictions that have been introduced by the government is to reduce those contact surfaces where we see that there is a risk for a spread of the virus. And of course, we also want to improve the situation for those who have to work. They should be able to get to work without risking getting ill. And public transport is a very, very important example. And I just want to stress that the situation is serious. It's not just about the number of people who are admitted to hospital. It's also about the people working there. Many doctors are on sick leave. That ends that set of rejoinders. And we will continue with the next one, where we start with Annie Lööf from the Centre Party. Please go ahead.
Fru talman, citat.
Madam Speaker, it has been a strength for Sweden to be able to agree on security policies, that we can have a good dialogue with the Riksdag and not get involved into a political game. That's what the Prime Minister said as she invited the parties of the Riksdag to talk after the unacceptable Russian statements and the turbulence near our country's borders. I welcome that approach from the government, but the comment raises some questions nevertheless. There's already a majority in the Parliament for a Swedish NATO option. If this Prime Minister is serious about what she says about consensus and agreement, the security policy line of the government should be adapted to the views of the Swedish Parliament. So I ask if Magdalena Andersson is truly prepared to assess the matter of a NATO option in the discussions which will take place with the parties. Thank you very much. Prime Minister, please.
Fru talman, det finns ett...
Madam Speaker, we have an announcement from the Parliament about NATO, and of course this is something that is being looked at within the government offices, but my opinion is clear. Right now what we need is stability, and this is not a time where we should change our Swedish security policy line. That would not benefit stability in this very serious situation. That is my opinion, and I'm very clear about this. But of course, it is important that the Parliament is being informed about the security policy situation that we're in, and that is also why I have invited for such an information meeting this afternoon. Final rejoinder.
Påkallats att Sverige skulle byta säkerhetspolitiska linje.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, we're not saying that we should make a significant switch. Instantly, we're talking about how it impacts our defense and security policy area, just like Finland did. And a NATO option and an enhanced cooperation with NATO would be a concrete way of strengthening cooperation both with Finland and with NATO. And it is a decision, of course, made well over a year ago by the Swedish Riksdag. If the Prime Minister is serious in the approach with a broad consensus, we cannot just have the approach of a minority government. We need constructive discussions in order to ensure that there's a shared approach. So I ask once again if Magdalena Andersson is prepared to truly assess the matter of a NATO option in the discussions I assume will start already this afternoon. Thank you very much. Final rejoinder from the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I do not intend today, in such a situation where we need stability, to change the government policy in such a way that it would risk increase instability. But, on the other hand, the government is crystal clear towards Kremlin and everyone else. The European security order still applies, and this is nothing that we are willing to negotiate. Sweden can choose its own security policy line, who we cooperate with, who we exercise with, and that is not negotiable. And that is also important for those political parties in the parliament that would like to see us joining NATO. I do understand that, and I do defend that policy, but I am not going to change the Swedish security policy today, because that would be very dangerous. Thank you. That concludes that set of rejoinders, and we then continue with Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, Prime Minister, the production of electricity in Sweden is very cheap. It costs from a couple of cent per kilowatt hour to produce electricity. But for our customers this winter, it's cost 6 kronor to buy it. And the reason for this is that this cheap Swedish electricity can be exported to those markets in the EU that have a higher electricity price, which is something that the power companies, of course, profit from. And then to compete with that, we have to pay a higher price to get back that electricity, our own electricity, the electricity we have invested in and produced ourselves. Now, this has to do with the integrated electricity market in Europe, which this government has actively wanted to sort of be a part of. Now, France in this autumn said that it shouldn't be like this, in fact, that all the preconditions in your own country should, in fact, define your electricity price. Now, why is the government against this? Why have you combated this? Why should German gas prices or basic prices determine our prices here in Sweden? Magdalena Andersson, your floor. The reply.
Madam Speaker, I do understand this problem that is being described by Nooshi Dadgostar, and the high electricity prices is something that has a serious impact on many Swedish households. Many people were in shock when they saw their electricity bills in December, not least those families who are living on the margins, and that is why the government today is introducing a proposal that I hope that the Parliament will support. We want to make it easier for those households who are severely impacted by these high electricity bills, and this is something that we take very seriously. But at the same time, in Sweden, well, sometimes we do need to import electricity in order to be able to manage the supply. Usually it is not necessary, but when it is important that we have that possibility to transmit electricity from other countries. Final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, then it would seem as if we don't have that possibility today and that we haven't had that, which, I mean, obviously nobody's against the fact being able to regulate surpluses and deficits, as we've done in the Nordic region for decades. We've had this system within the Nordic region where we can help each other. But this is something else, which is why we have these price shocks, because basically we haven't got an energy crisis. I mean, the government, you say that yourselves. We are producing more electricity than we're using in Sweden. It's an electricity price shock that we're seeing because we're building a market of the basic good, electricity. I mean, we could export to countries that have much higher electricity prices. And the whole aim with this is to create the same electricity price throughout the EU. That's the whole goal behind this. And the Social Democrats, you were against this before. And why have you changed tack? Why don't you go along with France there? That is the preconditions, each separate country that should set the price. Thank you very much. And now back to the Prime Minister for the Social Democrats for a final rejoinder.
Okay.
Madam Speaker, I will make Nooshi Dadgostar happy by saying that that is not what the government wants, to have a uniform prices setting in Europe. We are in a situation today where we see a green industrial revolution, and this is something that is being developed not least in the northern parts of Sweden. We also have consistency in our policy working against climate change, etc., and we see thousands of jobs being created across the country. And of course, we are not in such a situation looking for a uniform electricity price in Europe. But that being said, in the southern parts of the country, prices are being impacted by gas being imported from Russia now being more expensive, and that does have an impact on the southern parts of the country. And the government has today introduced this method we have for alleviating this situation for households. That concludes that set of rejoinders, and we continue with Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats.
Fru talman,
Madam Speaker, firstly I'd like to welcome Magdalena Andersson to these party leader debate, and I look forward to tough, good discussions in the future and debates. Now, you're in a rather odd position. Finally, she took up her position without a budget, without a coalition partner of 7 years. So, my question is with regard to this. Now, the Green Party, they say that they would like to go back to work with the government after the election. They want to phase out more nuclear power, prevent more mining, and prevent also tougher policies on crime, and also go back to our immigration policy from before 2015. So, Prime Minister, could you now tell the Swedish people today here whether the Green Party is welcome back to Rosenbad, to the government offices, if Magdalena Andersson may form a government again in the autumn? Reply from the Prime Minister, please.
Madam Speaker, we've had an excellent collaboration with the Green Party throughout these years. I just mentioned the Green Industrial Revolution, creating thousands of jobs across the country. And we're discussing even how to manage these new job opportunities that we now see. And they've been an important driving force in this development. So the Green Party has contributed greatly. But the Social Democrats will enter the election campaign as an individual party, just as we've done before. We're going to describe our election strategy. My question, however, for Ebba Busch is, if you want to have information early on, are you willing to share government with the Sweden Democrats? Ebba Busch.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it's obviously, I think in Swedish policy, it's always the Social Democrats. They never have to tell anybody about what they're going to do when they form a government. But the other side, they have to do that. And I've got no problem by saying the fact that I want the Swedish people to know that there is an alternative to this red-green mess. The Social Democrats, who seem to be prepared to welcome back the Green Party to the government, but not reply about how to work with a budget, how to cooperate with the Left Party, and the Left Party not wanting to support, or the Centre Party not wanting to support a party cooperating with the Left Party. Now, our alternative is a new start for Sweden. In contrast to this mess, is that we have a new government with the Christian Democrats and the Moderate Party, cooperating with all parties in the Riksdag, the Sweden Democrats and the Liberals in particular. Thank you.
Och då var det...
Final rejoinder from the Prime Minister.
Ja, varsågod. Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, then I understand that as a clear promise, and then we'll have to wait and see what Jimmy Åkesson has to say. My evaluation, well, you were the one, Ebba Busch, who wanted to have information early on, but my evaluation is that we have to be careful. If we did learn something here 2018 when we formed government, it is that you have to be careful and not lock yourself into a situation leading up to elections, because I do think that we'll have complicated negotiations this year as well. But the Social Democratic Party is very clear. We are not going to cooperate with the Sweden Democrats. And this is information that we have already provided, and I stand by that information. And then when it comes to more precise information about the election, well, we have to get back to that. But I now understood that you made the same promise that you're not going to work with the Sweden Democrats either. And that concludes that set of rejoinders. And we continue with the next set, where we have Johan Persson from the Liberal Party.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to return to the energy crisis that we're experiencing in Europe today. And the energy issue is, of course, a very important one. And it's decisive for the climate, obviously. In a difficult position, we need to do more for the transition. And also from a security aspect as well. Geopolitical aspects, we can see Russia and its aggression. But for Swedish companies and businesses, I mean, to have access to safe and secure, sustainable electricity is, of course, important, as well as for our consumers. Now, is it impossible for the government to say that we sort of broaden our energy mix in a future where we have modern nuclear power in Sweden to balance wind power, which is also good, solar power, very good as well, future hydro or hydrogen as well? Rejoinder from Prime Minister.
Ja, det är fullt möjligt för företag.
Yes, that is fully possible for companies to build new nuclear power plants in Sweden, but there are no such applications, and I assume that is because a decision has been made that it's not viable. We have many applications, however, where companies want to extend wind power, and we could double the Swedish electricity production that way, and that would also be much faster than nuclear and would generate cheaper electricity. And that is something that would suit us well. And I do hope that the Liberal Party will be a constructive partner to help us ensure that we can extend wind power quickly so that we can get cheap electricity to consumers and to companies alike, because right now electricity bills are way too high. And the final rejoinder, Johan Persson.
Madam Speaker, now we can agree on that entirely. Before we had 24 reactors, then there were 12, and now there are 6. And there are strong forces in this Riksdag or wanting to phase out those 6. And we're talking about important energy. I mean, the hydroelectric power that we have in Sweden, which we also pay a price for, I mean, exploiting our rivers in this way from the natural perspective, of course, or perspective of the environment. And that was very important then during the Cold War, after the Second World War. But if we look... I mean, we're listening to the rejoinders there with the Left Party isolating countries. I mean, and those of us who believe in cooperation, I think we can all agree that we need to cooperate with this rather than building walls. But we need to have a price setting of all electricity production, which makes it reasonable to invest in nuclear power. Now, today we have these punishing taxes for energy, so it's not possible to invest. So are you prepared to reduce taxes there? Final rejoinder, the Prime Minister, please.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, well, this is something that you talk a lot about, nuclear power, and it is fully possible to build nuclear power plants today, but it's not happening. And if you want to see that happening, then you have to have a clear plan by whom, where, and how to finance this. Should there be yet another tax on Swedish consumers and more to pay when you pay your electricity bill? There is no such plan, so this is just empty words that we hear. The Swedish households cannot heat their buildings with empty words. What we need is electricity here and now, and that means that we need to speed up what the market wants to do, and that is wind power. And I hope that we will be able to collaborate and do this together so that we can quickly expand and have more cheap wind power. That concludes that set of rejoinders, and we will continue with Per Bolund from the Green Party.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, my rejoinder it connects with the previous one, actually, because we welcome that the government now has then decided to reduce the costs in this rather serious situation, but that's not enough. We need to do a great deal more to have a better energy market in the future. And together, the Green Party, together with the Social Democrats, as part of the government, we have done a great deal along those ways, and we've invested in wind power, more green energy and electricity, and this green businesses, which has also meant that despite these high prices, we've had, in fact, low prices from a European perspective for many years. And together we've also achieved a goal about 100% renewable within the near future. So therefore, it's surprising how you're opening the door to nuclear power. Investing in wind power giving the cheapest electricity, why then do you want to open the door to this expensive nuclear power? Thank you. The floor to the Prime Minister for her rejoinder, please.
Talman.
Madam Speaker, well, this is something that we will have to agree upon within the EU, and nuclear will be part of that European energy mix for some period ahead. And our evaluation is that nuclear has to be part of that taxonomy, and it will be. And it will be part of that energy mix, which is also the line that the Swedish government has been working along. And then we have the right-wing opposition that says that nuclear power is sustainable, and that is not a very intellectual point of view, I would say. And whether nuclear is actually sustainable, well, we cannot see anything today. That will take generations. Per Bolund.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is now that we have the possibility of increasing the production of new green renewable electricity, for example, sea-based energy. And this is the potential that we have to gain as much protection as possible so that we maintain low prices, both for businesses and for private consumers. But then, of course, we need to prioritise. We need to orient investments in that direction, what can give us lower price and more energy in the near future. But what we then need to do is to speed up this process. And the Green Party, as part of the government, we have in fact tried to put through or to set up inquiries for this. Now, when the list on government bills came in the spring, we saw that this wasn't in fact included, the speeding up of this process for more green energy and electricity. Why is that, Prime Minister? Final rejoinder from the Prime Minister, please. Thank you.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, I fully share Per Bolund's ambition. We should extend what is quick, cheap and environmentally friendly. And here we need to ensure that we cooperate in Parliament and also in our different municipalities, because unfortunately things are way too slow today with municipal permits for sea-based wind power, something that could create cheap green electricity quickly. But my evaluation is that nuclear will be part of the Swedish electricity mix and not the least part of the European energy mix for some time ahead, which means that it will be a part of that taxonomy. And that is also a prerequisite for us being able to agree on that system. And thank you. That concludes that set of rejoinders, and we continue with the speakers list. And the next speaker will be Ulf Kristersson from the Moderate Party.
Fru talman!
Madam Speaker, the Moderate Party and the Social Democrats lead two different alternatives for government. Now, one where we can agree on how the most problems can be solved and therefore get things done. And the other one then, old alternative, which time and time again has shown that they have so many different views that there are no solutions to major problems at all. And a government alternative which understands that real integration means that we have less immigration, against the other alternative where you want more people without reasons for asylum to stay in Sweden, and one alternative that wants to deal with the dangerous shadow economy or society, and then the other alternative that the other day understood finally that there was that problem at all. So one alternative that is united in trying to get order in Sweden against the alternative that lacks an idea of what the problem actually is and are in total disagreement about what the solution is. The Social Democrats, the Green Party, the Left Party and perhaps the Centre Party have no joint political orientation. And recently the Green Party underline what every Social Democrat knows and is afraid of, and that is that the Green Party after the election will only accept a government that they are part of. The Green Party don't just demand and require compromises, they want a right of veto in all important issues. A social democratic government is therefore also a Green Party government. Sweden needs a new government, a government wishing to resolve the major problems of our country, not a government whose only driving force is to stay in power. Thank you. Thank you. And the Prime Minister from the Social Democrats, Annie Lööf from the Centre Party, Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party, and Per Bolund from the Green Party have requested rejoinders. We'll start with the Prime Minister, please.
Händer mig hela tiden också.
That happens to me all the time as well.
This happens to me too all the time. Let's swap places.
Fru talman, den svenska marknadsskolan.
We're interchangeable in that respect. The Swedish schools, Madam Speaker, is unique in the world. No other developed country in the world has taken it quite as far as we have in the Swedish schools market experiment. The result speaks for itself. Extremists run religious compulsory schools that strengthen segregation. Swedish taxpayers' money has ended up in extremists' hands in Somalia and in sex clubs in Thailand. Large international venture capitalists are pumping out billions in profit money, which should be used to new school books and teachers. Rather is used for fancy yachts and other luxury products. Intellectually speaking, is the leader of the Moderate Party of the opinion that this market-based system is the best possible for Sweden, really? Or, if not, do you have the strength to refocus the policies? Ulf Kristersson?
Madam Speaker, no other country in the world has a Swedish welfare policy where we pay things together, but where you can make your own choices. No other country will accept that people without large fat wallets can pay for their schools, and a school that you have chosen for your children. No other country has this system. So just say it as it is. You are against choice. You were against choice when it was introduced. You have been against it since then. You just don't like the idea of families being able to choose a school that suits their children. You say you want to regain democratic control of schools. What you mean is close the international English school. Call those parents and say that we're going to close your school because we are going to decide ourselves. So stop being so hypocritical. Thank you very much. Final rejoinder from the Prime Minister.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I take the answer as to be interpreted as a yes. Ulf Kristersson would like money, which we've all paid in the form of taxes, which is to be used for our children in their schools, to give them the right teaching and education, to get them study materials, pens, rubbers, erasers, should I say, and libraries, gymnasiums, everything that they need. This should all be pumped out as major profits to large groups and companies. Perhaps Swedish schools will be acquired by foreign powers. I want us to have control of the situation. I want the tax money to be used for the purpose it was intended for. And with that said, I'm very happy to have a diversity of schools. There are many schools run by independent operators in Sweden, foundations, for example, and trusts, where the purpose is not to make money. And it is unique. And of course, the party friends in other countries of the moderate party have come to Sweden to study the situation, and they've concluded that they would never want to repeat this and introduce the same in their countries. Thank you. Final rejoinder for, of course.
Madam Speaker, that's because in many countries you allow people with fat wallets to go to private schools. Instead, in Sweden, we have then decided that people, regardless of their financial situation, that they can make the choice themselves. This is a unique part of our welfare model that you have never understood. And the fact of the matter is that we want to maintain choice and resolve the real problems. The Prime Minister knows, just as far as I do, that the real problems are not about the international English school. It's about the schools where there's no good quality at all, where 50% of the pupils don't have grades as they leave schools. And these areas where there's so much disorder that the parents try to get their children away from those schools. That's a real problem. Think if Sweden could resolve the real problems instead of sort of coming up with pretend problems, returning more power to the Social Democrats. And if it was so possible, why didn't you do anything? Why haven't you done anything in the 7 years that you've been in power until now? That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, Annie Lööf from the Centre Party, please.
Ja, du är längre.
Yes, I know you are taller than me.
Fru talman, för nästan ett år sedan så satt Ulf Kristersson i tv-studion på SVT och sa att Sverigedemokraternas retorik hade förändrats så att de hade blivit ett mer seriöst parti. Så här ett år senare så är ju frågan vad som egentligen har förändrats hos Sverigedemokraterna mer att de nu får samarbeta med Moderaterna och Kristdemokraterna. Partiet har ju profilerat.
Now that the party gets to work together with the moderate party and the Christian Democrats, 1.6 billion Muslims, they are a terrible religion, we hear. There's a proposal to restrict the use of other languages and learn other languages, and a Kurdish communist to determine important questions, referring from the plenary here in the chamber to a person elected, a member of parliament elected in public elections. What has really changed in terms of the rhetoric? Ulf Kristersson.
Madam Speaker, now I think that every party and party leader has to be responsible for what their own members say. So, in fact, ask that question of Jimmie Åkesson. But what I meant was that throughout this pandemic, I think that all parties in this Riksdag have been constructive, have been had good at working together and have, in fact, been serious parliamentarians, which is important. Moreover, I think in many questions, the Sweden Democrats have, in fact, good, solid parliamentarian stances. And Annie Lööf, you just said just a moment ago, in your rejoinder with the Prime Minister, pointed out quite correctly that she should adapt herself according to the parliamentary majority for the NATO option. And I agree with you on that. And I congratulate Annie Lööf that you have the same stance as the Sweden Democrats. Without their support, we wouldn't have that kind of majority. You just pretend otherwise. Thank you. Final rejoinder from Annie Lööf.
Madam Speaker, I have no problems with agreeing with the Sweden. I have the same opinion as Sweden Democrats in some issues. That's been the case over the years on a number of issues. I mentioned this issue mentioned by Ulf Kristersson only an hour ago, but that's not the issue. It's their values, their rhetorics. And by saying that the Sweden Democrats have changed, they've reworded their rhetorics, or as the moderate party Elisabeth Svantesson said, that she walked back what she had said earlier about the racist expressions by the Sweden Democrats. Your party is helping to whitewash their policies and this party. And as far as I'm concerned, their rhetorics increase segregation. I know the moderate party well. There's a respect of what we can learn from history. They're focused on the future. And I don't understand how you choose to legitimize these values and messages from the Sweden Democrats. It's about their rhetorics and their stances in the Sweden Democratic Party. What does this show us? Did they leave xenophobia and hate speech behind them? When will the moderate party take a stance away from the racist statements, for example? Thank you. Final rejoinder, Ulf Kristersson.
Madam Speaker, everyone knows that both the Sweden Democrats and the Left Party have a terrible past. We all know that quite well. But as Annie Lööf just said, it's not about the actual issues. But for me, it is about actual political issues. This horrible past, they need to deal with that themselves. But for me, I'm thinking about what problems can we resolve together in this chamber where we have the same view to then work together, which is why when it came to more money to the system of the care for the elderly, I cooperated with the Left Party because it was required. It's the same for all political issues. We need to find joint solutions to joint problems. I'm looking at the political issues, and I have respect for other political representatives that have different views to me. That is important from a political point of view. Thank you. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. And next we have Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party, please.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, Ulf Kristersson has, of course, been Minister for Social Affairs and Social Insurance in a previous government under Fredrik Reinfeldt and the alliance parties that where decisions were made to make substantial changes to the sickness insurance. Wage earners who had been paying into that insurance they lost their insurance entitlements, and the alliance government used the money for many other purposes that they preferred. And to be perfectly honest, Annika Strandhäll, as the replacement for Ulf Kristersson, did not really improve the situation either. In spite of promises from the Social Democrats of an improved welfare sector, she continued to make the situation even more difficult for those with severe illnesses in the social insurance. Now we have a breakthrough. The Left Party has implemented and ensured that we get a number of improvements and raised levels in the activity insurance and sickness insurance, other rules to qualify more easily. Which of these features would Ulf Kristersson like to remove? I'm happy to talk about the qualifying day and the end of entitlements too. Thank you very much, Ulf Kristersson.
Madam Speaker, as I just said to Annie Lööf, I'm interested in political stances if we have the same view, and also differences, areas where we don't think alike. Now, Nooshi Dadgostar, she expressed her stance at the end, and a lot of extensive improvements is something that I, in fact, achieved when I was minister. many of an insurance which is so important, which wasn't working well, a social insurance that Göran Persson, the previous Prime Minister, his policies led to twice as many people on sick leave, more people retired early, people who could work. And that was untenable. And these are systems which are so important for people who sometimes do get ill, but then they want to go back to work. And those changes I made those because I believe in this basic Swedish model, which is you work when you can, you're ill when you can't, then you can't work, and then you go back to work as quickly as possible. That's our line. Thank you. That's the end of the... for time for Nooshi Dadgostar's final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, I know that Ulf Kristersson does not wish to say which deteriorations he'd like to make. That would be interesting information in a year of an annual general election. Almost 100,000 Swedes lost the entitlements from their own insurance during his years. They've been contributing to it, paying towards it. Respect the right of ownership, Ulf Kristersson, and ensure that we end up with an insurance which is workable, which will work for the wage owners of Sweden. That is the right approach to work. When you get into a job, you should also have an insurance which is linked to it, because we do contribute to it ourselves with our payments. And I ask this question again repeatedly because Ulf Kristersson chose not to answer earlier, but here's another opportunity for Ulf Kristersson to explain to the Swedish people what he'd like to do in the future. Which parts of all this would he like to roll back? Is it the guarantee levels that he'd like to reduce? What about housing allowances, raising taxes for illness and activity benefits? What about qualifying days, end of entitlement periods, etc.? Thank you. Final rejoinder, Ulf Kristersson.
Madam Speaker, now those of us who work with social insurance, we know many things. And one thing is that if you can't work and you can never work ever again, then you need to retire early, with a different term in bureaucratic Swedish. But you get that. Then if you're not satisfied with that, then you then turn to the courts. But if you then can go back to work, then you need to get help to get back into the labour market and make your own living. That is the basic principle for me. It's a holy principle for me. People who can't ever work ever again, they need to retire early, and those who can need to get back to work as quickly as possible. Today, the problem is that when it comes to benefits, is that half of our immigrants, adult immigrants, can't make a living themselves. That is marginalisation for you. It's got nothing to do with social insurance for sick leave. Is more to do with social benefits. Low level of education, people who can't work, but they should be able to work, and they should get jobs. Thank you. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. And next we have Per Bolund from the Green Party, please.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ulf Kristersson has spent quite some time bad-mouthing the Green Party's policies, which has contributed to major green investments across the country. But Ulf Kristersson doesn't have a lot to present other than a lot of words, which will not heat any houses or help Swedish industry with energy provision. He's talked about all the relevant energy modes, but he's operating a campaign in reality against green energy. 60 terawatt hours, the moderate party is saying no to. Almost half of the production, they're talking about nuclear, but it takes about 20 years to construct. And if you look at Finland and the UK and France as examples, it's going to take time. We need green energy here and now, is what we're hearing from the industry. Ovako says that all parties and all politicians need to realize that the factor of time, the element of time, is important. Here's my question for Ulf Kristersson. How does the moderate party justify their objections to wind power when Ovako and North Polestar and others are so in favour? Ulf Kristersson.
Madam Speaker, I'm not saying that the Green Party is bad. We have different views, and I respect that. Actually, it's the Social Democrats who are quite happy to speak ill of you and then pretend that they haven't been able to do everything because it was all your fault because you were a part of the government, and now they want something different now that you have, after you've been part of the government for 7 years. That's between the two of you. But when it comes to winning the election, I mean, you who have such different views and you're going to govern again, I mean, that's something we need to put a stop to. Wind power is good, but it's not always windy. Wind power is good, but it's not always windy. So the more we need to have more planned energy, as it were, production that we need here. I'm in favour of solar power, of hydroelectric power, of wind power, and also of nuclear power. This mix that most people understand is needed. Twice as much use of electricity and climate crisis together. We need that mix. Thank you. The floor to Per Bolund from the moderates. No, from the Green Party, says Madam Speaker.
Fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Ulf Kristersson is very welcome to the Green Party as well, if he'd like to see what happens in reality. But it's only words that he's presenting. It's lip service. Moderate party members are saying no to one project after another. 60 terawatt hours needed by the Swedish industry is refused by the moderate party. Even offshore wind power that you can barely spot using binoculars from land. They're on a campaign because they only want to focus on one type of energy, nuclear. There's a radioactive smoke screen there claiming that it would be of interest. Nobody wants to build it, but they're also against energy efficiency improvement. When the right-wing budget bill was voted through, there were energy efficiency improvements to reduce electricity bills for households, etc., that were scrapped. They talk a lot about wanting an extensive energy mix, but they're counteracting and working against the energy type modes that actually work. It's a real betrayal. Ulf Kristersson, then, final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, when I talk to Swedish industry, which I do quite often, not least about these issues and not least this winter, I have time and again, I hear the same thing. Please guarantee stable, dependable, price-worthy electricity. Exactly what we don't have in today's Sweden. Exactly what you have created by phasing out nuclear power. That's what they want to get away from. They're not against wind power. I'm not against wind power. But as I said, it's not always windy. If we want lots of wind power, then we also need lots of hydroelectric power and lots of nuclear power. If we're going to double the use of electricity in the next 2 decades, then we need a magnitude of this. And I think nearly everybody understands this. But to pretend that we don't need nuclear power, to pretend that we don't need a basic energy production that is fossil free, then we're pretending that there is no crisis, aren't we? Thank you. And that's the end of that round of rejoinders. And we go back to the speakers list. And the next speaker on the speakers list is Jimmy Åkesson from the Sweden Democrats. Please, the floor is yours.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, we are only getting started, said the Prime Minister in her initial address, and oh my, I dread it. I share Ulf Kristersson's view that we mustn't under any circumstances have another 4 years with this current government, regardless of how it's composed, with a Democrat or a social democratic-led government in any case. In particular, when the Prime Minister tells us that the way the country looks like today is only the beginning, we heard. People who are being shot in our streets, people who die waiting for health care, people who are forced to take out a loan to pay their electricity bills, people who have worked hard throughout their lives and who are still living in poverty. There are so many very serious problems in this country today, Madam Speaker, and when the Prime Minister says that they're only getting started causing all these trouble, I believe a very large majority of us, I truly hope that most of the people who will vote this autumn understand that we need to get a new government. We need a new leadership for this country, a leadership which will see the serious situation this country is in, and of course also brings both the policies and the willingness to take action to resolve the current situation, bring our country back onto the right track. Reduced migration, an obligation-based immigration policy, harsher punishments, more authority for the police, more availability in healthcare, raising pensions, and more, not less, nuclear power and stable electricity production. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. And the Prime Minister, Magdalena Andersson of the Social Democratic Party, Annie Lööf of the Centre Party, Nooshi Dadgostar of the Left Party, Johan Persson from the Liberal Party, and Per Bolund of the Green Party have asked for rejoinders. Starting with the Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, as we know, in November the right-wing parties voted through some changes to our budget, and you were proud over the influence that you had. And how did you use it? Well, you introduced a new tax where those who cannot work because of functional impairments, for example, have to pay more in tax than a wage earner. And Jimmy Åkesson, well, if you now decide, then these people have to pay more tax every year than those who work. And that was an important part of what the budget outcome of that vote, what it was about. And why should those who have functional impairments, making it impossible for them to work, why should they pay more than a wage earner in tax? Jimmy Åkesson.
Fru talman, jag måste säga...
Madam Speaker, I have to say that I am surprised that the Prime Minister, who's fairly new in that capacity and has been the Minister for Finance in this country for quite a number of years by now, chooses to pick out one item, one line in an extensive budget to use it in the way the Prime Minister is doing right now. That's not a serious approach. You have to look at the budget as a whole, where we have contributed in this chamber to see the adoption of a proposal where the very large majority get their needs covered, such as those with functional disabilities, who are elderly, who are poor, etc. All in all, they see a considerably improved situation with the budget adopted compared to the one the then Minister for Finance, Magdalena Andersson, presented to the Riksdag earlier last autumn. You have to look at the facts, not individual points this way. Thank you very much. Magdalena Andersson of the Social Democratic Party, Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, Jimmy Åkesson didn't answer my question. Why? How come that this tax is being introduced? Why is this right and proper that individuals with functional impairments, making it impossible for them to work if they suffer from chronic illness, a serious injury, if they were born with a functional impairment, why should these people pay more in tax? And you can talk about individual budget lines as much as you want to, but this is something that matters, and it shows what value you attach to people if you have such a particular tax imposed on these individuals. So that was why it was important for us to do away with the unfair tax on pensioners, for example. And this is also an unfair tax for those who have functional impairments, and you use your influence to reintroduce that. Why? Jimmy Åkesson, final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, once again, it's this straw man argument which we always hear from the Social Democrats side and the government we've had for almost 8 years now, and it's not a serious approach to look at it this way. The way you value people, if based on reading a budget document, a budget which is used as the basis, the foundation for how we govern and manage all public activities, say that that is an assessment of how you value individuals, well, then you need to do it on the entirety of it, not just individual details. I think the Prime Minister agrees, and all in all, also those referred to by the Prime Minister will see a considerable improvement in their conditions than if the budget proposed by the Prime Minister had been adopted. They will have more money available. They will see a raised standard of living with our budget. And to me, that is a true testament to the fact that we value a lot of people higher than the government does. Thank you. That concludes this round of rejoinders. And the floor now goes to Annie Lööf for the next round of rejoinders. For the Centre Party, you have the floor.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, Russia continues to use military might to reach political objectives. We see continued aggression on the border towards Ukraine, and they're trying to dictate how other countries should run their security policies, Sweden being one of them. And we really have to have a proper answer. I think that it's very unfortunate that you think that an authoritarian regime like the Russian regime is the same as a collaboration between democratic states. This is not just unclear. This is much more than so. And on your website, we can read that you feel that Sweden should respect the balance between the great powers, to respect the balance. Why is it so difficult for the Sweden Democrats to choose between a democratic regime and an authoritarian one? And what exactly do you mean with that wording? Jimmy Åkesson, please.
Fru talman, det var nog något av det mest...
Well, Madam Speaker, I think that was very far-reaching. Some of the most far-reaching I've ever experienced in many of the party leaders' debates I've taken part in, more than most, in fact. But, of course, the situation is extremely serious. It has been for a long period of time. The situation was serious also back in the days when the majority in this chamber were not of the opinion that we needed a defense at all. Who felt that the Cold War was something of the past. There's no threat to the country, and they chose to dismantle most of our defense capabilities and invest in local emergency team that would go travel around the world to help others. We've always protested against this. We've objected, and we've been consistent also. Before we were elected into the Swedish Parliament, we objected to it even before that. Nobody needs to doubt our credibility when it comes to Sweden in relation to authoritarian, imperialistic regimes such as the Russian one. Not even Annie Lööf needs to have any questions there.
Jag upprepar bara vad som...
Madam Speaker, I'm just repeating what the Sweden Democrats have on their website, that you are to respect the balance between Russia and the United States of America. And this is just one example of many, how difficult it is for Jimmy Åkesson to choose between different values. Orban, Merkel, Macron, Putin. You supported an American president who caused a coup d'etat and didn't agree to the result of an election, and now you're talking about the United States and Russia being equals, and that we need a balance between the two. It's there, black and white. And what do you mean? What do you try to say? Why is it so difficult to choose between something that is democratic, a democratic regime, and an authoritarian regime? It looks more and more as though you have a major problem here. And final rejoinder, Jimmy Åkesson.
Ja, fru talman, vi har inget...
Madam Speaker, we have no issues with democracy. Perhaps Annie Lööf, on the other hand, has a problem with understanding or refraining from coming to very far-reaching conclusions based on what she has made up. I don't know what reality she's living in, but of course, there's absolutely no room for a democratically focused Swedish politician to in any way compare the part of the world we belong to the part where they oppress people, where they threaten their neighbors with military might, etc. We've never done any of the kind. Annie Lööf is making this up with far-reaching and very strange arguments indeed. I don't buy it, and I'm not going to get into this game of trying to respond to made-up statements presented by Annie Lööf here today. It's simply not relevant. Of course, Sweden has a significant responsibility and a role to play in the current situation, and we will shoulder that responsibility together with those we collaborate with in the world. Thank you. That concludes this round of rejoinder, and the next one is with Nooshi Dadgostar of the Left Party, who will get the floor first. Please go ahead.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, the Sweden Democrats vote and act in the Swedish Parliament and also in local assemblies in such a way that heavily contributes to the housing shortage. Not too long ago in Gothenburg, for example, you ensured that a decision was made that all public housing should be allowed to change them into becoming co-ops. And that would be a gigantic experiment in the city of Gothenburg, and that city would turn into something similar to the Stockholm nightmare, where we have seen that, where one has done away with the cheap rentals in older buildings across the city, and many of these apartments would then instead become very expensive co-ops, condominiums. And also you did away with the investment support that we had in the budget that happened last fall. Why is this so important? Jimmy Åkesson, Sweden Democrats.
Madam Speaker, I have never claimed that it is important not to construct more affordable rented accommodation. Nor will I intervene in local politics in Gothenburg. I'm not sufficiently familiar with it, and I assume Nooshi Dadgostar is at the same level as I am. But there is a lack of housing. There is a housing shortage, and we have to deal with it in different ways depending on which part of the country we are in. Now, of course, across the country, in smaller and medium-sized towns, you need to be on the offensive to ensure that more housing is constructed. Now, where different companies choose to construct is not something that I can reasonably tell them, nor any other politician in this chamber. That is up to the market forces and the companies to decide where they choose to construct new housing units. I assume Nooshi Dadgostar isn't of a different opinion. Final rejoinder, Nooshi Dadgostar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I note that the Sweden Democrats are not intending to contribute in any way to doing away with the great housing shortage that we have in Sweden. It's the opposite. You act locally, and I understand that you do not want to express your opinion, but you also do this nationally with doing away with all the systems that we have for us to ensure that we quickly can build new cheap apartments, which is very important for people to be able to live their lives. They have to have some place to live. Young people want to be able to move away from home, but that doesn't seem to interest you at all. The government a couple of weeks ago presented a proposal in Parliament, and that had to do with those who have a rented apartment that is being refurbished. Then they should then not have a increased rent that is increased tremendously immediately, but it should happen step by step. But you stopped that proposal. And why is that important to you? Jimmy Åkesson, Sweden Democrats.
Madam Speaker, I've been listening to Nooshi Dadgostar for 2 minutes now, and I still haven't fully understood what it is she's getting at, other than to say that she thinks I'm not performing well. But that is no surprise, nothing new there. When rented accommodation is she's objecting to turning rent accommodation into condominiums, and she wants government construction subsidies. We oppose such subsidies unless we're talking about elderly care facilities and facilities for disabled and others in need, because we've seen that that can improve the situation, whereas many analysts and I make the same conclusion, that the types of subsidies proposed by Nooshi Dadgostar only produces more expensive housing, in fact, and more expensive construction processes. It has no impact for a very extensive financial investment indeed. And this is why we're opposed to such subsidies. And I haven't really noted any other question on any other statement by Nooshi Dadgostar, so I have nothing else to respond to. Thank you very much. That concludes this round of rejoinder. Johan Persson of the Liberal Party has requested the floor for rejoinder. You have the floor.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, then, we have a new country. Sweden has become a new country, I guess you can say, in many ways. Many things cannot be changed. We can't go back in time. We have much that is quite amazing. Research, innovation, companies that deliver, and culturally as well. We do export a lot every year. So there are many things that are good, but there are many things that are very bad as well. We have energy policy that is not sustainable, for example, and we like to discuss with Jimmy Åkesson about this because we want to change Sweden in a rational way. And there perhaps we can find each other, but then we have values that are completely different, and our two respective parties were started for different reasons. But a question for you, Jimmy Åkesson. These children in refugee camps in Yemen, what are they to eat? What are they to do? What are we to do? Jimmy Åkesson.
Ja, fru talman.
Madam Speaker, I think this is a relevant question, although it was a very long and very broad one. But anyway, now we have a refugee situation in the world, which is worse than ever, I think, probably. When I started discussing these issues, I think we were talking about 30 million refugees around the world. Now we're talking about 70, 80 people who have had to leave their homes either in their own country or in another country. And some have come to Sweden, and they haven't really succeeded very well. But anyway, that's another matter. But we need to give those organizations who are best in the world when it comes to help to refugees in the area close to their countries do their work. We need to give them the resources so they can do their job to help children, but others in these refugee camps, education, food, medicine, a roof over their heads, etc., what people need. And our policies have always, compared to so many other parties in this chamber, sort of invest tens and thousands in these people here in this country. Rejoinder.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, of course, incorrect decisions have been made, and we are changing decisions as the world around us changes their policy. And you have done an amazing journey as well, the Sweden Democrats, when it comes to your view on women, homosexuals, and the EU, not the least. And I welcome that. I do think that more people should think like the liberals with a liberal mind, but it's still difficult to reach Sweden Democrats when it comes to international aspects. And of course we do have a responsibility for what happens in the world, and also for these poor children starving in refugee camps in Yemen today. And I cannot understand that you wanted to reduce foreign aid to the extent that you want to. We have a responsibility that these individuals can have freedom as well, shape their own lives, and we simply do not agree. Jimmy Åkesson, please.
För mig är det helt
Madam Speaker, I can't quite comprehend why the Liberals, despite the situation that we have and the lack of resources that we have in our welfare system, we have people being shot in the streets, etc., ad nauseum. Now, they are still prepared to stand by this 1% goal. 60 billion a year we're talking about. 60 billion of Swedish taxpayers' money should then go to other countries' citizens. And all those money, have all that money gone to poor children in Yemen? Perhaps that would be reasonable. But they don't go to that, do they? Because a lot of this goes into the pockets of corrupt regimes, and we have no clue where much of it ends up. And that is the problem. Naturally, we need to take an international responsibility. We have a moral responsibility for that, and we need to do that, yes, but we need to do this with reason, and it needs to be balanced. And I mean, bearing in mind how our country looks today, it's not reasonable to send all those billions abroad. Thank you. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, we have Per Bolund from the Green Party, please.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just saw the movie Don't Look Up with DiCaprio and Jennifer Larson. And this is about two researchers, and they're trying to warn the world about this comet that is approaching, and no one wants to listen. But really, this movie is about the failure in managing the climate crisis, about the fact that politicians do not take research seriously, and how you just wanted to have measures taken in the future instead of now. And it's actually a fun movie, but then starting to listen to you, well, then I cannot laugh anymore, because Sweden Democrats and you do everything that we have in that movie. You do everything you can to not take the climate seriously. It's always about somewhere else, someone else, and sometime else that we are to do something. And how come, why don't you want to listen to climate research, and why do you want to continue to import fossils? Jimmy Åkesson.
Fru talman, nu är det ju...
Madam Speaker, no, I don't agree with Per Bolund. Well, that's not a surprise, really. But anyway, I don't agree with his description. I mean, it's not the situation. I mean, it's not the researchers, that I don't listen to. But I mean, I have tried to listen to some and understand. But when you look at the Green Party, when you've had the chance and been part of the government for 7 years, and just look at what the situation, not just when it comes to climate, the environment, the energy, a number of different areas. And I feel, well, actually, I have listened enough to Per Bolund and the Green Party. I'd rather listen to researchers, which is what I do, actually. Let me take one example, Madam Speaker. The Green Party has contributed to a large extent to break down a coal-free energy system to the system that we have today. And now you're saying that you take the climate threat seriously. Actually, we are the ones who take the climate change seriously, and not the Green Party. Thank you. Per Bolund, final rejoinder, please.
Thank you. I'm proud of what we have done to increase the Swedish electricity production, not least from renewables, but also the fact that we have major industrial investments due to this, with the investment programs and the climate ambitions that we have, and the Sweden Democrats, and also the moderate-led government that we could have after the elections. Well, you risk all of this, and this is industry saying this as well, not just researchers. Also, industry wants to have sustainable electricity. And you usually say that you love what is Swedish, but that does not seem to go for fuels. The Sweden Democrats, you seem to like Russian oil. We've touched upon that before. And you do not want to try to remedy the electricity shortage. You don't want to have increased subsidies for electric cars, for example. And how come? Why is this so important that we buy imported fossils instead of producing Swedish electricity? Jimmy Åkesson, final rejoinder.
Fru talman,
Madam Speaker, well, I understand that Per Bolund is proud, because of course you should be. If you've done something you believe in, then of course you're proud that you've succeeded doing that. That's fine. However, the problem is that unfortunately, because I think most people do understand that there isn't that much to be proud of. They're just Per Bolund and a couple of more people who are proud of how the country looks today. But more and more people are sort of leaving the Green Party. And let's hope to God that more people leave before the next election. But I am not against different types of energy production, different alternatives. I think it's good to have different alternatives, production alternatives, but just because you think one thing is good or better and belongs to the future, you can't then make it more difficult for people to live their ordinary lives and take loans to heat their homes, pay a huge amount, chunks out of their income to pay for their petrol. That's not the right path to take. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. And now let us go back to the speaking list. And we have Annie Lööf next from the Centre Party, please.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, 23 million people. That was the number of climate refugees a year ago, almost to Sweden. They were forced to escape from natural disasters, extreme weather, shortage of food and water, and climate change is a threat against all of our future, life, health, economy, survival. And we have to do everything we can to stop this. And the Centre Party route ahead is clear. We want to combine strict targets for emission reductions with major investments in green technology. With such emissions, energy storage, electrification, well, we need to use all the renewables that we have in forests, in our agriculture. We have to make it easier for private individuals and companies to have a green life. And the companies, they are the key. That is where we have innovation, new jobs with new resources, accessible care across the country, a judicial system, police in streets, and they're also important when it comes to preventing men's violence against women. We can strengthen civil society. We can have school health care with the aid of companies, and they also help us finding a way away from psychological ill health. It is about finding competitiveness to be able to live in our rural areas, but we have to work to get there, and we need reforms, and that is something that we, the Centre Party, will continue to fight for. And we need to ensure that we have climate safety, security, equality, so that we can develop rural areas, that we can have openness and decentness. And we need to have change so that more people can live a good life and believe in the future. We need a freer, greener, stronger Sweden. Thank you. And the following, Nooshi Dadgostar from the Left Party, Emma Bosch, Christian Democrats, and Per Bolund from the Green Party have asked for rejoinders. Nooshi Dadgostar.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, now in the middle of this crisis when it comes to electricity price, the government is talking about building more cables to the German market, which is the market which is leading to these high prices in Sweden. Now, if we do that, then we will have higher prices in Sweden. We should not use the taxpayers' money to build cables to increase our price levels to the levels on the continent, etc. And also, this is good for the power companies, but not good for business or citizens. These aren't my words, but this is what SSAB Chairman Lennart Evrell said. Chairman also of a committee working with energy issues, because we don't want the low Swedish prices with the continent's high prices, because that will hike the prices for Swedish business and will mean that they'll have to lay off people or perhaps close down. So what's your response to that?
Varsågod. Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, Swedish business, they believe in trade, market economy, and they know that about 50% of the Swedish electricity price is tax. So it's not a market that is the price. It is that we have to ensure that we need to reduce consumption taxes so that we can bring prices down for consumers and companies. And this is not correct when it comes to electricity cables across Europe. We want to be able to export clean electricity to our neighbours, and that way Germans and the Poles can also use the Swedish wind and water power instead of dirty coal. And what we see today is an inefficient climate policy. So my question for you will be, why are you saying no to an efficient climate policy for all of Europe, all of EU, so that we can reduce emissions in this emergency situation we're in? Nooshi?
Madam Speaker, I know that Annie Lööf is very critical to Lennart Evrell and SSAB. They don't believe that the taxpayers should be paying for building these cables because they realize that this will lead to very high prices for Swedish business. We who are elected in Sweden to represent the people, we should ensure that the investments that we've made in Sweden in energy production, which is fantastic and fossil free, this must benefit Swedish companies. It's based on those calculations that we have this new industrialization in Sweden. SSAB are concerned because if we have a network or a grid between the south and the north, and of course the north will have higher energy prices. Of course they're in favor of market economy, naturally. But you should be responding to them, not to me. They are the ones who are concerned, Annie Lööf, because now the electricity price is increasing because we are linked to the other markets where you have much higher electricity prices. Thank you, Annie Lööf, for a final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, it's Nooshi Dadgostar standing up here, and the two of us are involved in this debate. And I wonder, aren't you misleading the electorate? How will we speed up the green transition and work with the global climate crisis if we do what you say we're supposed to do? Because transnational solutions and through market economies, that is how we can accomplish something. That is how we can have more green electricity production, reduce climate emissions, have green jobs, green companies. We need more electricity cables in the country. We need more production. We need lower consumption taxes, and we need competitive conditions for our companies. That is how we can create more jobs for the companies, and that is how Europe can take the green lead in this global transition. More collaboration, not less. That concludes that set of rejoinders, and we continue with Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me start by quoting a pensioner from Munkedal. I have 12,000 as a pension, and now my electricity bill is over 10,000. It's just not doable. End of quote. So in 1 year, his electricity price has increased by 725%. He is one of many people who've experienced leaving one energy system which was one of the best in the world. And the Centre Party is a bit like those who are against nuclear power. It was a Centre Party 50 years ago who fought nuclear power when it was cool. Now it's just cold, not cool. But anyway, and in 2020, it was the Centre Party that put a stop to our attempt to the closure of Ringhouse 1 and 2. And here we are today. So my question to the Centre Party is, was this good? Or in time, have you realized or changed your position with regard to nuclear power?
Fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, 12 years ago, the alliance parties, and you were in that alliance, we had an energy deal that was turned into Swedish legislation, where we did away with the ban that there was on researching on nuclear, and we made it possible for those actors who want to build nuclear to do so. And since then, the Centre Party, the Moderate Party, and the Christian Democrats and the Liberals, since they made that decision, there is an opportunity where you actually can invest in nuclear. And we do not think that this should be a political decision, but it should be a decision for the market. What we want to see is increased production, and then nuclear will be part of the the energy mix for the future. But we will also want to invest in renewables, which is why we want to invest in building cables and in increasing the production. And as a piece of extra information, well, that effective tax was also did away with. And Ebba Busch, final reminder.
Thank you. Now, so what we did then with regard to that tax, that was necessary, in fact, to save nuclear power then. But I'm wondering whether the Centre Party, you still defend the fact that you didn't contribute to prevent phasing out early of reactor 1 and 2 in Ringhouse. And it's not true that political decisions aren't leading to the closure, because we have a government in place that actively said that they don't want nuclear power after 2040. We have a Green Party that until recently were part of that government and said that they did not want nuclear power in Sweden. Moreover, we have an electricity certificate system which where you say that give benefits to those that can give energy every now and again, like wind power, but not those that can deliver electricity or energy 24/7, which is wrong. And that, of course, is not good for nuclear power. Final rejoinder, Anne-Löf.
Madam Speaker, in a day and age where we need to work across party borders, where we need stable conditions for industry, for energy policy, well, the Moderate and the Christian Democrats, they have left the agreement that we made. They have simply said that they want to walk over. But are we to build cables across the country? Are we to increase transmissions, energy storage, so that we can use renewables when there is no wind, when we actually need it? Is that what we want to do? Do we want to have stable conditions for all energy production in Sweden? Then we need to take our responsibility in the political parties. We need to be willing to negotiate and stand by agreements that have been made, because it is a stability and long-term thinking that we need in climate, in the pandemic, in the healthcare system, when it comes to safety, security, and also when it comes to energy. We want to reduce consumption taxes. We want to have long-term conditions to increase production. That is what we and the industry needs, and we would be happy to collaborate. Thank you.
That's the end.
Replik går till Per Bolund, Miljöpartiet. Varsågod.
Tack så mycket, fru talman. Ja, Miljöpartiet och Socialdemokraterna och Centerpartiet har ju förhandlat om skogspolitik under lång tid.
Well, thank you. We have been negotiating about forestry production for a long time, but politics also has to be financed, as we know. And many forestry owners now want to do things to safeguard biodiversity, and also want to have contributions from the state. But when we voted on this, you agreed with the Sweden Democrats, and we lost 2 billion. Many forestry owners across the country wanted to have compensation, and some 50,000 forestry owners have said that they will not be able to do enough for biodiversity, and they're now forced to fell trees against their will. And my question for you is is that what we want? Do we just want to fell trees and not protect the environment?
Det centrala för Centerpartiet är att värna den biologiska mångfalden. Att öka artriket.
Thank you. enhancing and safeguarding the diversity of species and forests is our main focus. And individual landowners will do this in the best possible way. That's our assessment. They've been doing it for generations already, safeguarding and managing the Swedish forest. That's why we have such a wealth of diversity. It's important that Per Bolund doesn't misguide anyone listening to him. There's more allocated next year than we had last year for these purposes, because we ensure that there's a staircase with several different levels to enhance the measures and the investment in the valuable conservation work. So we will do everything we can to safeguard the forestry bill that has been developed and presented. We think it's important that you receive compensation when you manage and conserve your forests, and it's important that there are funds available, and that is the case. Thank you. Per Bolund, final rejoinder.
Fru talman, jag är glad att...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased that the Centre Party, that you're in favour of the Green Party's policies. That was our line, as it were, where many other parties tried to speak ill of the Green Party, and we're very proud of the fact that we do have this at record levels, but it's not enough. We need more investments, in fact, for these forestry owners that want to protect the natural environment. They have to wait for funds, and they're disappointed that they can't use their ownership rights in the way that they wish to. However, I'd like to ask a question to Annie Lööf, which is linked to this decision about the Sweden Democrats' budget. Our stance has always been never to give them any influence, and I thought we shared that view, Annie Lööf. You've said many times, in fact, that we do not want to give the Sweden Democrats any influence whatsoever, but with this budget and that decision, and to not vote on the alternative, which would have led to no influence from the Sweden Democrats. So really, does that mean that you've given up that struggle? Annie Lööf, next.
Talman,
Madam Speaker, this is hypocrisy. Per Bolund. 1 year ago, a decision was made here in the Riksdag on an amending budget bill with the Moderate Party and the Christian Democrats and others on the strengthening of the elderly care, for example. And Per Bolund and Märta Stenevi were still members of the government at that stage. For a number of years now, both the Left Party and the Sweden Democrats have been allies to implement various and adopt various decisions by forming the Green Party stayed in government. There were other reasons why you stepped down in the autumn. I would have preferred to vote through even more, but you can trust the Centre Party. That's what I'd like to underline. We're not going to accept a government in the hands of the Sweden Democrats. We've shown that very clearly over and over and over again. We want to find broad collaborations in the centre, and we want to keep the left and right-wing factions out of it. Thank you. That concludes the rounds of rejoinder. Nooshi Dadgostar has the floor for her second address. Please go ahead.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, now in the autumn, I visited a number of different industrial towns, discussed the future of everything from steel production to battery production, the new green industries that are going to put Sweden in the front seat, as it were, when it comes to the climate transition. But they have very clear needs, and that is a whole load of cheap energy. And the chairman of SSAB, Lennart Evrell, he was very clear in the press a couple of weeks ago. If we build cables to the continent, we will get high electricity prices in Sweden. And you should not use taxpayers' money to invest in cables that increases Swedish electricity prices to the levels on the continent. And it benefits the power companies, but not electricity consumers or businesses, he said. And it is frightening that this government feels that it is reasonable that we, this country, that in recent decades have built up a fossil-free electricity production, and that we should then pay because Germany has happened to make itself dependent on expensive Russian gas, which is dangerous to the environment. The incentive to build fossil-free energy is weakened big time. The link to countries and markets with much higher electricity prices will lead to a further hike in prices, even if we expand our own production of power. That applies both to households and Swedish industry. It's totally unacceptable and unreasonable. It undermines industry as well as climate transition. The government must act to take back control over our energy policy. Again, we can't continue in this way to be part of the European electricity market. Thank you. The following have requested rejoinders: Ulf Kristersson from the Moderates, Johan Persson from the Liberals, and Per Bolund from the Green Party. First, Ulf Kristersson. The floor is yours, please.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, the Moderate Party and the Left Party are far removed from each other in economic policy, but at least the tax policies of the Left Party is clear. They want to raise taxes. If the left can have more of a say, more people should be paying state tax. They want to introduce hereditary tax, property tax, etc. More or less along the lines of Magdalena Andersson before she became party leader. There were good reasons why these were abolished. They opposed the work approach, the jobs approach. They undermined some of the tax system. They made it more difficult for family companies with generational shifts, etc. But they also want to reduce the mutual fund accounts entitled ISK in the Swedish banking system for savings for private individuals. And is it in fact the case that the Social Democrats and the Left Party are pulling in the same direction?
Madam Speaker, now Ulf Kristersson has got it the wrong way round, because what the Left Party wants, they want to reinforce the whole idea of people working, because we don't want people to live off the work of older generations. It's not just the ownership which determines things, it's work which builds the country. And it's not unreasonable that those who have an awful lot of money, where generation after generation inherit this capital, that is important, that there's a grandfather that did a lot, but you yourself need to work as well. I feel that you can't just count on somebody else in the family having done so before. Everybody needs to work to build this country, so therefore those who earn an awful lot of money, they also contribute to our welfare system. We're talking about a couple of percent of people who would be affected by this. Not that many, actually, and not as applies to these ISK accounts. And we're very, very rich people. Of Kristersson, for a final rejoinder, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It was interesting to hear about this. I'd like to know precisely where you draw the line. How few people will be affected when you add taxes to the so-called ISK mutual fund savings accounts? And what about family companies? If you inherit a family company, for example, and somebody retires, they don't work, do they? They're just receiving income. I know so many family entrepreneurs, not very many in third or fourth or fifth generation, but who've inherited a family company. They work day and night to make sure that their employees have work, the customers get good products, and they do it on behalf of their own children if the children would like to take over the company further down the line. That's also work, isn't it? Thank you. Nooshi Dadgostar, final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, pretending to be angry because, Ulf Kristersson misunderstood what I said on purpose, so I'm not going to say much about that, and he knows that too. If you work and own a company, then you need to have an income naturally, but we have to look how you can from one generation to the next, how you inherit things. But that's not what I'm saying, that it's not unreasonable in a welfare state that people with huge wealth, they also contribute to the welfare system, because we should also be able to have new entrepreneurs in the country to build up their own wealth. Then they need a good school, they need health care, they need care for the elderly. And I'm clear on this, that we're talking about a very small percentage of people for the ISK accounts. For example, we're talking about people with huge wealth. It's not unreasonable that we have equality in this country. This is something that has served us well. It's what leads to successful companies, strong schools and a good healthcare system. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next, Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats, please.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to have an exchange of concerns with Nooshi Dadgostar, but hopefully also share some ideas on sustainable energy policies, because I'm also worried about the energy policies of the current government, with great hopes placed on electricity production, energy production, which is weather dependent, and great hope placed in constructing cables and pipelines to more southern parts of Europe. What's the left party's approach to the fact that the other leg upon which it rests in Sweden is to transfer electricity from the north to the southbound? I see that you've travelled to major industries and visited them. I've done the same in the northern parts of Sweden. Is the left party in favour of taking the clean energy from the north of Sweden instead of expanding energy for the entire country?
I note with interest that Ebba Busch that shares my concern with regard to expanding or building cables to the continent and being part of the European electricity market. I'm happy to speak to Ebba Busch about that, how we can ensure that that development doesn't continue, because that is in fact leading to these high prices, in particular in the southern parts of the country. But I share that view, actually, that because just what Ebba Busch says, if we're going to continue building cables and linking up with those countries which have very high prices, then of course that's going to cause problems in Sweden. If we then have cables to the north of the country, then of course that means that these high European prices, the Russian gas that Germany is dependent on, those price levels would then of course reach northern Sweden as well. That is a concern. We cannot accept it. We therefore need to ensure that nobody is affected in this way. Thank you. Final rejoinder from Ebba Busch, please.
Thank you. I'm not saying that it's categorically incorrect to ensure that there can be transmission between countries, but categorically speaking, it is incorrect to put such emphasis on it. We can discuss this further, but does this mean that the Christian Democrats could expect the support of the left party in a balancing attempt in terms of energy provision for the country as a whole, where the Social Democrats are telling the industry and the households in the northern parts of Sweden that your competitive edge, the emission-free component, is one we will spend billions constructing major cables to transfer from the northern parts of Sweden to the middle and southern parts of Sweden. Does this mean that the left party would consider collaborating with us in my party on this? And is there any opening towards being a little bit less categorical in your objection to nuclear power? Thank you, Nooshi Dadgostar. Final rejoinder.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's take it from the beginning then. The problem that we're experiencing today is that even if we expand our power production, we're going to need much more, actually, both in the north and in the southern parts of the country. However, despite us doing that, it's not going to help us, because the power companies, if they can send their electricity, new power, to Germany or other markets which are more expensive, where they can get more money for their energy, then they'll do that, which means that however much we're going to invest in our power production, which is not going to benefit us, it's just going to be exported. Of course, we need to have an exchange of electricity between countries. We've always done that and will always do that, if I can have a say in this, but not in this commercial way where the aim is to create uniform price throughout the EU. We are in favour of expanding our power production in Sweden, but the important thing is also that if we do that, we also need to ensure that we safeguard our prices, and there is a risk that we won't. Thank you. That's the end of that round of rejoinders. Next we have Johan Persson from the Liberals, please.
Tack, fru talman. Ja, det här är ju VPKs återkomst.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is the return of the VPK, the left-wing party, the cable cutters, for a new acronym. If Sweden has one thing that we produce which is in demand in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, then we need to isolate Sweden so that we drop the price levels in Sweden. What if we applied that to culture? We're only going to have ABBA performances with avatars in the globe arena, not in the UK. That's madness. We have an excellent electricity production. Unfortunately, we've closed down some fossil-free production, as it were. We have a situation right now where Sweden is part of Europe. We don't have to have any shutdowns. The prices will go up. And energy is a large part of geopolitics. So what's the left party planning to do in other areas where Swedish production is in demand? Are you going to close down the borders? It sounds like the comedy program Hassan when they warned about 10,000 German gay people.
I note that the Liberal Party, they call Swedish business, the president there, they call him Hassan. What they say doesn't matter, but the whole of Swedish industry is based on our cheap energy. Note that instead. Just as Swedish Business Confederation says that I don't think electricity is just like any good that we can produce and send back and forth. No, if we need to benefit from the huge investments that have been made. And look at what is happening in the rest of Europe. We've got Germany, closing electricity production and replacing it with expensive Russian gas, which is also so negative to the environment. It doesn't matter because, they can depend on Norwegian or Swedish hydroelectric power, that somebody else creates the power. So there's no incentive there to invest in fossil-free energy. Let us invest in fossil-free energy instead. Final rejoinder, Johan Persson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can assure Nooshi Dadgostar that the Swedish business community would like to be a part of the European market, the European energy market, and we keep Europe together. We make sure that Europe becomes greener and stronger, and we do it working together. But I understand, I think the approach of the Left Party, you didn't want to be a member of the EU. I don't know where you stand on that issue right now, but you didn't really like this idea of collaborating. When we talk about other issues like security policy, energy is about security. It's not just consumer and companies. You refuse to be part of European cooperation for stronger defence. When we talk about a NATO option and there's a turbulence in Ukraine and the Russian invasion has already begun, you don't want to join forces with us. You want to isolate Sweden, cut off all the cables, don't take part in any collaboration. You want to be alone, but you're going to be left alone. And VPK, the old name for the Left Party, will be back. Nooshi Dadgostar, final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, that was a mishmash of all different things. I think this is some arguments that the Liberal Party sort of discusses in their office. That's not true. We love cooperation. We cooperate with anybody. But you have to be realistic as well, bearing in mind all the choices that you make in different sectors. It's not just about, we can't just throw out Swedish energy in a market and hope that it all will go well. Because now we can see that many families are struggling, paying a huge price for this. And we have energy prices, electricity bills, which are so high that we have to use taxpayers' money to pay the power companies for these high prices. That's not reasonable. It's not reasonable that our industry is being undermined because Johan Persson wants to play with the market in all sorts of ways. We need to be able to make a decision for all these separate things and look at the positive sides and the negative sides, not just throw out everything into the market and say, let's hope everything goes well. That's the end of that round of rejoinders as well. And next we have Per Bolund from the Green Party, please.
Ja, tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nooshi Dadgostar was surprised that I asked for a rejoinder, I can see. But there are reasons sometimes to put questions to parties you collaborate with as well. We in the Green Party, we would like to put the climate first. It is the be-all and end-all of our era, and we need to reduce emissions both in Sweden and in other parts of the world. And I was somewhat concerned when I listened to what Nooshi Dadgostar said about the possibility of producing and exporting green electricity from Sweden. They want to stop grids and pipelines and cables to other countries. Emissions are global, of course, and as a world-leading climate country, we have a responsibility in Sweden to reduce our emissions and help others too. And the European electricity market strengthens the chances of having security of provisionment for the Swedish industry. Why do you want us not to export clean energy to countries that use a lot of coal, for example? If we don't have an integrated energy market, how will that work? Nooshi Dadgostar?
Madam Speaker, let me start by saying that I'm not surprised at all. And of course, I welcome to discuss with Per Bolund. So then I have to say that this is not quite the situation. We have security in energy supply. We have had that since the 90s because we're working together with the other Nordic countries. And of course, we need to regulate a surplus and a shortage. But to pretend that we haven't had that until today, that is incorrect. However, I see that there is a shortage of incentives, for example, in Germany, to invest in renewables. And that is why they can do what they're doing. They simply do not care about the fact that they should themselves invest in building energy so that they can supply for themselves and their population and not just believe that everyone else should do it. And that is a bit of a nightmare. In that way, no country would have the incentive to invest in power production because it could just be exported to someplace else. And we see that, for example, we also see how that has an impact on our climate policy. Per Bolund, final rejoinder.
Fru talman, nu har vi ju
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we have a new government including the Green Party in Germany, with ambitious plans to invest specifically in renewable green energy. And we have the same opportunities in Sweden. We've invested over 100 million in wind power, and we have great opportunities moving forward as well. But the fact of the matter is that the energy exports from Sweden removes about 12 million tons of CO2 every year. This is something we should rejoice in, not be concerned over. Well, we can agree that we are worried about the high energy prices right now, but there are other solutions. We, in my party, are in favour of this. We want to have energy savings. Unfortunately, our budget proposal fell recently, but we can also step up energy production. 500 terawatt hours of wind power produced electricity has been applied for example. This could give us extensive provisioning of green energy for our industries in Sweden, but also the possibility to export it. Thank you very much. Nooshi Dadgostar, final rejoinder.
Fru talman,
Madam Speaker, we share that opinion, needless to say, that we should have renewables. That is not where our opinions differ. The problem is that Per Bolund cannot say what that will mean for Swedish consumers in terms of electricity price, because you've said yourself that, you want to have a surplus. We should have more than what we need in Sweden. And then people are asking why our prices so high. And that is because of the market, because Germany is not going to invest. They don't have to. They can just rely on Swedish hydro. And as long as that is the situation, Swedish power companies will export, which means that we then have to pay an even higher price to ensure that we get the power from the utilities. And the problem is that if we extend production, which is something we shouldn't have to, but there is a risk that it will not benefit Swedish consumers and Swedish industry, but will be exported to another country where you can make more money. Thank you. That concludes that set of rejoinders and all rejoinders. And we continue with the speakers list, where we have as next speaker Ebba Busch from the Christian Democrats.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, the Christian Democrats always had particular focus on healthcare policies because we believe that it tells you a lot about the type of society we live in. If you look at how you treat people when they are ill or how you treat the elderly. So we haven't failed to notice that there's a dividing line in this House between those who have an ambition on how to improve healthcare and those who don't want any part of the responsibility, just saying, oh, that's up to the regions, the county councils, it's up to them to resolve. That latter approach, to me, is politically hazardous and not responsible. And what we've seen during the pandemic only strengthens our beliefs in the Christian Democratic Party. We need to implement the healthcare reform of the century, close down the county councils and bring back the main responsibility to the state level. This is the only way to ensure that we can have equal access and equal care across the country, because I'm not defending a single county council, nor will I crucify a single one of them. It's not the clock's fault that it's moving backwards, as it were, because without a national reform in the healthcare sector, the waiting times will only grow. Look at what happened when Göran Persson added billion after billion to reduce the waiting times, and there was no measurable impact. When the alliance parties introduced structural impact reform, they were able to reduce the waiting times by 50%, and when the Social Democrats halted that development, they grew again. They were at record levels already before the pandemic, and you cannot deal with the crisis and structural shortcomings in our welfare sector and in healthcare with pandemic restrictions. We need a new start for Sweden where we make the most of dealing with and resolving the problems. We get rid of the county councils. We implement the care reform of the century and emphasize patience. Thank you very much. Johan Persson, Liberalerna, has the floor for his second address.
Replik. Fru talman, jag är
Madam Speaker, I have hope in spite of difficult times, but I am concerned over many Swedish children in Swedish schools because we see gangs, bullying, girls being harassed. We see that children very often actually end up at home. They refuse to go to school, and I'm concerned because it looks like parents may not be allowed to choose a school if the left is to decide. We need another type of school policy. We need to increase fairness across the country in the different municipalities. And schools across the country need more order and obvious things like physical books. Children should have a book in their hand, not a weapon or narcotics. And the freedom to choose, that is something that saves many children. We shouldn't sabotage for children. The opposite, we should increase the responsibility that that parents take for the children. We have to ensure that schools can turn the trend, and we should not be willing to compromise when we have actors who are not serious about doing the right thing when they start a school. We shouldn't have any Islamists running a school in Sweden, and we know that it takes time to build things, but to ruin them, that's very quick. And I have been against the Social Democrats turning schools into a municipal matter, and this is something that will take a long time to repair, and we need now to start with what is acute, the emergency, where we need to have good order in schools, zero tolerance when it comes to crimes, and teachers should be allowed to be teachers. We're celebrating 100 years of democracy in Sweden this year, but we should also be celebrating 180 years of a public school that was introduced in 1842, and we needed this to have democracy. And we have rejoinders, and we will continue with Jimmy Åkesson.
Nu är de lika långa, tror jag, för du stod här tidigare.
Ja, det går bra att sänka.
Jag behåller den så. Fru talman.
I think I'll keep it at this height. I think you stood here before. Madam Speaker, I've noted over the past few years that there's been a discussion from the Liberals in particular, commenting on the restrictions during the pandemic. And you announced yesterday that you intend to vote against the Pandemic Act. It's not a very well thought through idea, as I see it, because we need legislation to give the government the authority to take action speedily and based on the recommendation from public authorities. On the other hand, the Liberal Party are right in that there are major restrictions incumbent on civil society, our citizens and their companies, but they've not tabled any proposals to changes. But we've proposed amendments to enhance the ability for the Parliament, the Riksdag, to control these measures. They need to be presented to us, etc. And I ask Johan Persson if the Liberals would be prepared to reconsider and support our proposal instead. Johan Persson.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the question you're asking, Jimmy Åkesson, is very relevant. The foundation here is that we here in Parliament, we make laws, we establish the budget, and then we're also to control what the government is doing, so to say. To control governments and government agencies, and that is the starting point. And we approved the Pandemic Act, and we also requested it, but then the situation was different. Now we're 2 years into the pandemic, and we need to learn to live with it, because we'll have new influences and new variants, and we're saying that now is enough. We need to ensure that we do not have more restrictions than necessary, and we have to ensure that we have the necessary restrictions, but we think that the government has gone too far. And of course, if the Sweden Democrats have another proposal, we'll listen to you. But the point is that we need to defend Swedish freedom. And Jimmy Åkesson, final rejoinder.
Madam Speaker, I fully respect what Johan Persson says, but you're sort of missing the target nevertheless when you say that you're going to vote against the Pandemic Act. As I see it, we need it. We need a permanent legal act linked to crisis of this type. The Pandemic Act, of course, is a temporary piece of legislation. Over the course of these 2 years, we should have made more progress so that we are no longer left with only temporary legislation. We should have more permanent legislation in place to regulate these issues. But as long as that's lacking, we need a Pandemic Act, as I see it, Madam Speaker, but it needs to be able to guarantee that there's political support and that there's a political debate on what's happening. So voting against the Pandemic Act is not showing responsibility, as I see it, but there are ways of amending the current act so that it's improved, so that it is, in fact, truly improved, and my encouragement is for the Liberal Party to reconsider and vote for our proposal. Thank you, Johan Persson, Liberal Party.
Thank you. 2 years ago, we didn't really understand that this would be the future, and I want to stress the fact that the Communicable Diseases Act, it's kind of brutal, where you can imprison individuals to protect society, where we have dangerous contagions. That is something that is unfortunately still being used and unfortunately still being relevant. But this is about putting the entire population in prison to close culture, companies, etc. And that is not what we want. We have a situation today where, well, we feel that 2 years into the pandemic, we have to say enough is enough. For the future, we need rules that are appropriate so that we can manage the Communicable Diseases Act, but also manage restrictions, but the power to control the checks and balances that we have. Well, this is the chamber that we protect personal freedoms, and we need to be able to discuss this here. Thank you. And that concludes that set of rejoinders, and we continue with Per Bolund from the Green Party.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've listened to the various rounds of rejoinders, and I've heard Johan Persson of the Liberal Party praise the market. And this is also clear to see from the Liberal Party website. More market, fewer subsidies is what we see under the heading of nuclear power. It's well known, however, that there are no applications. No one is trying to get permission to build more. Lennart Söder of the Royal Institute of Technology has calculated that the cost would be somewhere between 100 and 200 billion Swedish kronor for a new nuclear reactor. Now, it's permitted to dream, of course, but you get no electricity that way. And if you counteract and work against other types of energy, that adds insult to injury. There's a campaign with the Liberal Party on board against wind power, for example, saying no to as much as 30 terawatt hours, including offshore wind power. How do you tally all this? Johan Persson?
Vi ser gärna en stark svensk.
Well, we would like to see a strong Swedish energy mix, and hydro, of course, is obvious. And we have to ensure that we do what we can to maintain and develop a Swedish nuclear. But we also have to understand that, the Green Party, quite simply, you were founded to shut down Swedish nuclear power, and we've seen this, and also with terawatt taxes, etc., what decisions you have made, and that was a big mistake, I can say, for consumers, companies alike. And the dilemma with wind is the self-determination that we have in various parts of the country. I love these turbines, but not too many people want to have them in their backyards. I don't know exactly where the company wants to have them, but I do agree that this is a problem, and we, the Liberal Party, we have to ensure that we continue to develop both wind and nuclear. Thank you, Per Bolund.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, this is a responsibility not shouldered by the Liberal Party. You're one of the forces trying to combat some of these modes of energy. But I'll just mention that we were set up as a party to work to save the climate and the environment. So we want to invest in types of energy that will help here and now. The nuclear power was not profitable in Ringhals. The owners didn't want to invest any further. That was why it was closed down. But it takes a couple of decades to build nuclear power. We've seen it in our neighbouring country of Finland, not least, but also in the UK and France. And that's quite expected, even if the Liberal Party made the assessment that someone would like to invest. We've made the investment in our party that it's in renewables, that there's a queue of interested investors. You're working against wind power and you're dreaming about nuclear power that nobody wants. If it costs between 100 and 200 billion, who's going to foot the bill? The taxpayers or the energy consumers? Thank you, Johan Persson of the Liberal Party. Final rejoinder.
Well, that would be cheap with the energy prices that we have today, and you helped putting us in this situation. I have to say that I really love the red-green in Finland, because look at what they're doing with nuclear power, with a new reactor that is now being commissioned, and that will facilitate greatly also for Sweden next winter, and they're also working with additional reactors. And why? Well, because they know that this is so important with this power that you can regulate. And look at any place in the country. We might add wind turbines, but we still need something where we can turn things on and off, and we cannot just use hydro, because you do not want to ruin all the rivers that we have, and we have to have a process so that people can accept wind turbines, and maybe that is possible. If you can agree to final storage of nuclear, then you might agree to wind turbine as well, but this is something that we need to look at. Thank you. And that concludes that set of rejoinders, and we continue with the speakers list, where the next speaker is Per Bolund from the Green Party.
Ja, tack så mycket.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This winter is characterized by two things. The pandemic is increasing again. We have to take action and compensate all those affected. The Green Party is very much willing to support the cultural sector. We've wanted investments for a long time, and we want even more allocated now. But we're also dealing with high energy costs. If you produce the incorrect agnostic of the reason. You might prescribe the wrong medicine. That's a problem. We see the main underlying reason being our dependence on fossil fuels and how it's impacting the European energy market. If we want to avoid price shocks in the future, we need to create security of provision of energy, creating our own renewable energy sources. The Green Party is in favour of the government's proposal to reduce energy costs here and now in the immediate because it's just untenable for many households, but it's not enough. We need to invest just as much to help households to reduce the basic problems, the major energy consumption. Reducing your costs in the longer term for the subsequent winters, insulating houses, replacing electricity-based energy to other types of energy, giving more support for solar panels and thermal heating, that would have a long-term positive impact. But we need to do more to reduce financial and economic gaps within our society. A juster, fairer tax policy, the newly adopted proposals to change the tax rates in the newly adopted bill, for example, for some of the groups of disabled, that needs to be reversed. We need to make a difference. From the Green Party, we'd like to raise the allocations for families and low-income households. We need to adapt the taxation system so that you don't pay more tax if you're sick than if you're working. We need to ensure that we can integrate people into our society. We create a cohesive society. Thank you very much. Ulf Kristersson of the Moderate Party has requested a rejoinder to this address. You have the floor.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, at the same time as many people cannot afford heating at home, the Green Party brag about the fact that they, together with the Social Democrats, are doing away with nuclear. And this is one of many quotes. Without the Green Party, more likely many of these nuclear power plants that have been decommissioned would still be in operation, and that's probably right. And the power that you have, well, that means that you take a heavy responsibility for the energy crisis that we're now in. You decommissioned one of the energy sources that we had that can produce clean, fossil-free electricity. Sun, wind, water, it's quite simply not enough. We need nuclear power as well. So let me ask this question. I'm curious. Will the Green Party be in a government that will hold on to nuclear power and develops it over the next few years? Per Bolund, please.
Ja, tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's important to point out here that nuclear power is not profitable, which is the reason why the reactors that have been phased out and closed have been closed, because it couldn't compete with renewables where investors are lining up, in fact, to invest billions in wind power, not least at sea, but also solar energy as well. Now, I think it's also important to bear in mind and remember that energy systems need to supply electricity 24/7. However, other than that, which you agree on, other than that, I think we differ very much here, our views, and we need to invest in those which have the lowest cost, and I think wind power there wins every time. I think we can balance, in fact, wind power with, together, hydroelectric power, but also hydrogen power, which we're investing in, and batteries. So the Green Party, we want less nuclear power, not more nuclear power. We're not going to participate in any decision with expanding nuclear power. I mean, there is a decision where you can do, but we're not going to participate in it. Thank you. Final rejoinder, Ulf Kristersson.
Madam Speaker, that was not my question. We know already that you do not like nuclear, and we have different opinions. I understand that. I'm for, you're against nuclear. And you're not going to be in my government after the election. Everyone knows that. My question for you was, will you be able to participate in a government after the next elections where they hold on to nuclear power and even extend it? Or are you going to use your veto to stop Swedish nuclear power? Thank you. Final rejoinder.
Ja, tack, fru talman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we're quite pleased with these investments that have been made in green renewable energy, which then gears the market towards other energy sources. And the agreement also that we're part of the decisions also made by the Parliament here, 100% renewables by 2040. That's in 20 years' time. And we support the fact that you can actually have nuclear power, but there's no competition there with the renewables for them. We see quite clearly that nobody wishes to make investments in new nuclear power here unless the moderate parties, together with the Sweden Democrats and the Christian Democratic Party, then give huge subsidies, which will cost taxpayers huge amounts. I mean, if there's anything that our energy customers are worried about, is that type of agreement. Thank you. And that is the end of that round of rejoinders. No further speakers on the speakers list. And thus this ends today's party leader debate. Thank you.
6. Anmälan om fördröjda svar på interpellationer. Jag anmäler att svar fördröjs på interpellationer enligt föredragningslistan. Punkt 7-12. Ärenden för hänvisning till utskott. Propositioner, skrivelser och EU-dokument hänvisas till utskott enligt förslag på föredragningslistan. Och därmed är samtliga ärenden på dagens föredragningslista behandlade. Kammaren övergår till anmälan av dokument med mera som har inkommit under dagen. Till bordläggning anmäls 2 EU-dokument. Och jag får anmäla att 2 interpellationer och 7 frågor framställts samt att svar på 3 skriftliga frågor har inkommit. Beslutar kammaren att avsluta sitt sammanträde? Svaret är ja.